You will always be less, black girl. You are nothing but entertainment for people like us. That was the cold, unadulterated venom Braden Mercer spat, the words slicing through the lakeside air as he brutally yanked Era's arms wide, suspending her taut like a sacrificial offering beneath the gnarled, ancient oak tree. Her young wrists and slender ankles were already bruised raw, scored deeply by the coarse, biting strands of rope. The student who had once been the very definition of quiet, focused pride, the tireless honor student, was now a living, breathing warning sign, hung utterly powerless. Her voice had been stolen by the shock, her hard-earned spirit visibly trampled and crushed before a sneering, captivated crowd. Yet, not a single soul among them dared to move, dared to step forward, until a furious, low voice thundered through the chaotic silence, shattering the manufactured spectacle. What began as that lone, terrifying act of courage would soon spark an unstoppable uprising, pulling back the curtain on the subtle, insidious machinery of power that had long shielded the monsters operating behind expensive school ties. Hit subscribe and stay until the end to see how one girl's raw, unflinching defiance could bring an entire institution, an entire school, built on silence and hierarchy, crumbling to its knees. They called it tradition, this systematic cruelty, as if institutionalized pain could somehow earn a revered place on the annual calendar. At Oak Hill High, where the polished hallways gleamed with deceptive cleanliness and donor plaques glinted coldly under the humming fluorescent lights, tradition meant one thing. The boy, always the boy, with the perfect, predatory smile, took exactly what he wanted, when he wanted it. Braden Mercer, varsity letterman, scion of old money, and legacy grandnephew of Principal Skinner himself, moved through the packed cafeteria like a seasoned tax collector making his weekly rounds. The wealthiest parents shook his hand at annual fundraisers, congratulating him on his leadership. The teachers looked pointedly past him in the crowded halls, perfecting their practiced blindness. The weak, the poor, and the unconnected learned quickly to keep their heads down, their gazes averted, and their pockets obligingly light. Lunch checks, he drawled, his lips peeling back in a slow, shark-like grin, his open palm demanding. A frightened freshman, his backpack noticeably secondhand, fumbled desperately to produce a few crumpled dollar bills. Braden snatched them, then casually clapped the boy's cheek with the condescending familiarity a delinquent might reserve for patting a dog. See? Contribution. He winked broadly at a nearby table of hulking athletes, who dutifully exploded into laughter on cue. 2 tables away, Era Thomas, a black girl with a meticulously neat braid and a quiet, laser-like focus, tried desperately to pretend the entire ritual was merely thin air. Era was the ideal kind of student that guidance counselors habitually cited in inspirational speeches. Straight A's, captain of the debate team, always the first to arrive to class. Her mother, a widowed nurse who was perpetually pulling brutal double shifts just to keep them afloat, had begged her daughter, *, keep your head down. *, no sudden office visits, no unnecessary marks on permanent records, no trouble that could possibly cost her mother a job they could not afford to lose. So Era learned silence. She swallowed raw insults like bitter, necessary pills. She forced herself to smile when doors were demonstrably shut in her face. She worked twice as hard as anyone else, only to be frequently told she was lucky. Silence, however, is not the same as surrender. It coils. It hardens. It waits. Braden soon drifted toward her table, flanked by 2 boys whose heavy shoulders suggested practiced brutality and whose laughter was dangerously light. He plucked a carton of milk right off a smaller kid's tray and dramatically set it down in front of himself. For the program, he announced, with the arrogant tone of someone redistributing stolen goods as if it were noble charity. Era kept cutting her apple into precise, uniform slices, exactly the way her mother taught her to stretch one piece of fruit across 2 meager lunch breaks. She counted, *1, 2, 3. Keep breathing. For mom. For college. For all the times you watched him shove, mock, peel dignity off people like spent stickers, and nobody said a single word. When she stood up to toss her pitiful leftovers, Braden deliberately stuck his expensive leather-shod foot out. It was a theatrical, unnecessary flourish for the benefit of his captive audience. Her shoe clipped his heel. The flimsy paper cup she was holding tilted, and a small, distinct line of water streaked down the pristine white leather of his sneaker. A sudden hush traveled outward across the entire cafeteria. Forks stalled mid-air, suspended by shock. Braden stared down at the wet shine on his shoe, staring as if the water stain were a fundamental affront to the natural cosmic order. You just scuffed $400 worth of leather. It's water, Era said, her voice steady and unervingly level. She felt the old tremor start in her hands, the familiar, unwelcome shaking that came when nurses called her mother in on her day off, when a teacher forgot to call on her despite her raised hand, or when a security guard followed her through the school supply aisles in August. She fiercely willed the tremor to stop. And you tripped me. A faint titter rippled from a nearby table. An athlete coughed clumsily into his sleeve, trying to mask his surprise. Braden leaned in close, the sickeningly expensive smell of his cologne mingling with sheer arrogance blooming off him. Say you're sorry. You should apologize for tripping me, Era's voice replied, clear and unwavering. The entire room seemed to inhale, holding its breath. Even the wall clock seemed stunned into momentary stillness. One of Braden's shadows, Trent, spoke first. What did she say? The other, Chad, chuckled, a sound entirely devoid of humor. The girl's got a mouth. Braden's smile didn't so much crack as curdle. It remained fixed and show-ready, while the cold, dark center of his intent became evident. He took a calculated step back, theatrically surveying his ruined shoe, the tiny puddle, and the black girl who resolutely refused to sink. Apology accepted, he announced loudly to the room. She didn't mean it. I did mean it, Era countered, opening her empty hands in a gesture of defiance. A table of senior girls gasped like a unified chorus. A teacher near the doors physically turned her body away, frantically rummaging through her large tote bag for a pen that clearly did not exist. Braden lowered his voice until it was a lethal, chilling whisper. You're what? Honors English National Honor Society, and you think you have dignity? Wait till the picnic. I'll show this whole school exactly what you are. Toy. Era did not move, simply staring through him, her eyes holding his gaze with cold purpose. He suddenly snatched up her backpack, rifled ruthlessly through it, pulled out her simple wallet, and took the last crumpled dollar bill inside. You owe me for laundry, project girl. He sneered, waving her $1 in the air for the entire cafeteria to witness. The crowd's laughter swelled, louder and more insistent now. Era's knuckles whitened around the edges of her tray, but she held her ground. Not a single word. Not a tear. She absolutely refused to grant him the deep satisfaction of her breakdown. Braden tossed her backpack dismissively at her feet and started to walk away, but not before leaning in one last time. His voice was so dangerously low that only she could hear it. Remember, don't bother bringing lunch to the picnic. You won't need it. For the rest of the lunch period, every set of eyes seemed to follow Era. Some were pitying, most were coldly indifferent, and a few were tinged with a secret, recognizable fear. She sat in sustained silence, her jaw clenched, staring at the single quarter on her table, refusing to allow any external force to move her. When the bell finally rang, Era stood, gathered her few things with deliberate slowness, and walked out without once looking back. That night, as dark thunderheads silently gathered over the affluently manicured landscape of Oak Hill, Era watched the ominous buildup from her window. She lay wide awake in the heavy stillness, listening to the restless wind start to howl, feeling the inescapable presence of the coming storm. She knew the true, high price of open defiance in a place like Oak Hill. The morning of the highly anticipated picnic dawned under a bruised, sickly gray sky, heavy and oppressive, as if the whole town sensed something dark and inevitable looming on the horizon. Era watched the sunrise weakly paint the world in washed-out shades, all natural color drained by the thick, restless clouds. She pressed her bare palm to the cool windowpane, half wishing that a sudden, spiking fever would miraculously save her from the day ahead. But Oak Hill had its rules, both written into the student handbook and deeply etched into the social hierarchy. All students must attend, the official email had stated. Attendance wasn't merely a tradition. It was an unspoken warning. Her mother was in the kitchen, brewing weak, cheap coffee, her eyes heavy with the kind of perpetual tiredness that never truly leaves. "Go, baby," she urged, pressing a soft sandwich into Era's hand. "It's just a picnic. Don't draw attention. Just enjoy yourself, okay? People notice when you're not there." The words stung Era deeply, not because they were cruel, but because they were steeped in fear, her mother's all-consuming, protective fear. So Era boarded the long yellow school bus like everyone else, silent, tight, and painfully aware in her own skin. The ride out to the lake grounds blurred past in jarring fragments. Tree branches clawing aggressively at the dusty windows. The shrill, artificial laughter of the cheerleaders. Braden's voice booming obnoxiously in the back row, loud as he always was. No one, of course, sat beside her. She pretended not to care. The picnic started with bright, meaningless banners and tinny loudspeakers. It was a carnival of forced, strained cheer. Chaperones dutifully patrolled the edges with their clipboards and weary expressions. For the first hour, it almost felt like a normal summer day. Lawn games, soda cans cracking open, and faint, tinny music leaking from tiny Bluetooth speakers. Era ate her mother's sandwich slowly in the shade of a large oak, counting every bite, measuring every shifting shadow. She saw Braden circling, always in the exact center of the action, his posse orbiting him like satellites. He looked her way twice, once with a lazy, certain smirk, and once with cold, calculated intent. Both times, she immediately looked away. Then came the announcement, jarringly flat and sudden through a portable bullhorn. "All faculty to the main lodge for an emergency meeting. Students, please remain strictly in the picnic area." The teachers filed out like a slow, beige river of blazers and sensible shoes, their faces tense and concerned. Some glanced back. One teacher's gaze met Era's, quick, apologetic, then gone, before she kept walking. Something essential in the atmosphere changed instantaneously. The nervous laughter thinned. The space between student groups seemed to stretch, becoming vast and exposed. Era quietly gathered her minimal belongings, ready to disappear for a while, perhaps walk the lake's edge alone and seek refuge. That's when Chad and Trent materialized, wide-shouldered, brimming with the easy, casual violence of boys who had never, ever been told no. Chad blocked her only path, his mean grin stretching. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his voice too loud, already drawing unwelcome glances. Trent flanked her other side, sealing her escape. The nearby crowd kept its distance, sensing the shift. She tried to step around them, her voice measured and precise. "Excuse me," but Chad only moved closer, occupying the last bit of available space. "We got a little surprise for you, Thomas." Braden emerged silently from the trees, hands casually tucked in his pockets, his gaze slick as cold oil. "Let's take a walk," he said, phrasing it as if it were a polite invitation. His tone left absolutely no room for any other choice. They smoothly herded her away from the protective density of the crowd, past the smoking grills and the colorful coolers, past the last, isolated ring of picnic tables. Era felt her chest begin to tighten, the fear constricting her breath with every agonizing step. She frantically looked for teachers, gone. She searched for a friendly, saving face. No one met her eye. Even the air seemed to thin out here, heavy with palpable, gathering secrets. They led her to the far end of the grounds, where a gnarled, immense old oak stood guard over a thick, menacing underbrush. Out here, the festive sound dissolved. Even the shrill shrieks from the tug-of-war game barely reached them. Era tried to pull out her phone, her hands beginning to tremble violently. Braden's smile instantly froze. "Give me that." His fingers clamped around her wrist, cold and unyielding, an immediate shock. He brutally wrenched the phone free, flicked it casually to Chad, who dangled it mockingly over the lake's murky, dark edge. "Don't," she managed to start, but Chad just grinned, theatrically thumbed the power button off, then tossed it with indifference. The splash was soft, muffled by the water. Final. Oops, Chad said, feigning surprise. Guess you're off the grid. Panic surged hot and fast. Era's mind raced. Asterisk no phone. No teachers. No witnesses, only these 3 boys and the restless wind. Asterisk she darted a glance toward the path back. Blocked. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her expression flat, fiercely determined not to let them witness her terror. Braden stepped in close enough that she could clearly smell the faint trace of expensive aftershave and absolute arrogance. You made quite a scene yesterday. Thought we should have a chat about it. I have nothing to say to you, Era replied, her voice taut, stretched thin. Trent circled silently behind her, blocking any last hope of retreat. She's got an attitude. I like that, Trent commented. Braden tilted his head, his cold eyes searching her face, waiting for a crack in her composure. You know, Thomas, you walk around like you're better than this place. Like you don't owe anyone anything. But that's not how Oak Hill works. He snapped his fingers once. Chad reached into his backpack and pulled out something thick and rough. It was rope, ugly and scratchy. Era's mouth instantly went dry. She darted left, attempting to bolt toward the tangled trees, but Chad caught her arm. His grip was absolute iron. He said, the fun's just getting started, sweetheart. She twisted, she kicked out, but Trent grabbed her other arm, his hold equally unbreakable. Braden leaned in, his voice cold and sickeningly gleeful. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Era scanned the clearing frantically. No one. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. She screamed, a primal sound, but the noise barely carried past the underbrush. Chad slapped a rough palm over her mouth, squeezing hard until her jawbone ached with pain. Be quiet. You'll ruin the surprise. They dragged her violently to the base of the oak, the thick rope uncoiling like a deadly threat on the ground. Era looked straight into Braden's eyes, searching desperately for any glimmer of mercy, any fraction of hesitation. All she found was pure, unadulterated delight. She knew then, with chilling certainty, that she was utterly, brutally alone. The rope slipped through Chad's fingers, ready to finish what institutional cruelty had started. The rope scraped Era's wrists raw as Chad and Trent pinned her hard against the trunk, their laughter grating and hollow in the isolated clearing. The old oak stood silent, its bark scarred and etched from years of students carving their meaningless initials. It stood witness now to a ritual far uglier than any secret it had ever kept. They wrestled her arms wide, securing her to an old, weathered wooden frame meant for tents. Splintered planks, roughly dug out from a forgotten pile of discarded gear. Chad yanked the knots mercilessly tight, the fibers biting deep into her sensitive skin. Trent spread her legs, fastening her ankles securely so she couldn't kick, couldn't run, couldn't hide. Era's heart hammered against her ribs, her last vestiges of hope shrinking down to a sharp pinprick. Braden hovered directly in front of her, smug and deliberate, holding up a filthy scrap of cloth. Open your eyes, Thomas. This is what happens when you forget your place. He tied the blindfold tightly over her face, knotting it hard enough to sting. The world instantly shrank to the sensory reality of sweat, rough rope, and the hot, immediate stink of pure humiliation. She twisted, frantic and desperate. Please stop. I'm sorry. Let me go. Her plea came out ragged, barely more than a raw sob, but the only response was Chad's sharp laughter and Trent's low, careless whistle. Behind the imprisoning cloth, hot tears began to burn her eyes. She imagined her mother, somewhere in a sterile hospital corridor, working another exhausting double shift, trusting implicitly that the world would not break her daughter while she wasn't looking. Braden stepped back, raising his arms wide in an expansive gesture. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present today's main attraction? His voice rang out, instantly drawing eyes and phones from across the distant field. Some people don't know how to follow rules. Some people think they're above the rest, so let's give them all a lesson in true humility. A crowd began to gather, hesitant at first, then rapidly swelling with curiosity. Mostly white faces, some smirking openly, some visibly uncertain, but most hungry for the kind of cold spectacle only absolute power and cruelty can create. A few onlookers snickered. Others immediately pressed the record button on their phones. Farther back, a girl in a powder blue hoodie bit her lip hard and turned abruptly away, shaking uncontrollably. A boy from the robotics club, ghost white, flinched, paralyzed by the raw memory of his own public shaming the previous fall. But no one stepped in. Not a single teacher. Not a single so-called friend. Braden paced deliberately in front of Era, arms wide, savoring the apex of his moment. See, this is Oak Hill justice. You think you can mouth off, you get put on display. You think you're too good for tradition? You become tradition. Chad snorted loudly. Better hope the mosquitoes aren't hungry, Thomas. Era strained hard against the rough ropes, her shoulders burning fiercely, her whole body shaking with strain and terror. She tried desperately to remember how to breathe. She tried to make herself small enough that no one would possibly look. The blindfold cut her off from sight, but she could clearly hear the snickers, the cold whispers, the click of dozens of phones starting to film. She cried out, desperate and vulnerable. Please, I'm sorry. Just let me down. I'll do anything. Her words splintered against the crowd, instantly swallowed by a wave of ugly laughter. It didn't matter what she said. Not here, someone in the crowd muttered. She's always acting stuck up anyway. Maybe she'll learn her lesson. Another voice chimed in. Each comment sank into Era's skin like jagged glass. Even now, she recognized voices. Kids she had patiently tutored. Faces she had sat next to in chemistry class. Their casual betrayal stung worst of all. Worst of all, a pair of girls from the student council, perfectly polished and poised, filmed the entire scene from a safe, detached distance. I can't believe she talked back to Braden, one whispered, utterly scandalized. Bet she doesn't try that again, the other replied. The words carved deeper than the rope. Braden circled closer. The sun pressed down hard. The air seemed to vibrate with stifling heat and profound shame. He bent down close to her ear, his breath hot. Should have just played along, Project Girl. Now everyone gets to see what happens to little liars. She felt the cold, hard tip of a marker press against her forehead. He scrolled slow and deliberate across her brow. The motion was cruel, mocking, the strong scent of chemical ink mingling sickeningly with her sweat. When he was done, he turned to the crowd, presenting his work. Let's get it on camera. Liar. Right where everyone can see it. She wanted to make a scene. Now she's the whole show. The students hooped and cheered wildly. Several stepped closer, jostling for better angles, phones held high. No one reached for the knots. No one tried to help. Even the Nananku, those few who knew the bitter taste of this kind of pain, watched in profound silence, haunted and helpless, staring rigidly at the dirt. Era sagged hopelessly in the ropes, deep sobs racking her chest. Please, someone, please. But her voice was lost in the chaotic noise, utterly drowned out by the grotesque theater of cruelty. Her throat ached raw from pleading. She felt as if she were sinking slowly through the earth beneath her feet. Somewhere, a teacher's voice called faintly from the main lodge, distant and far away. No one listened. Braden stepped back to admire his work, the black marker still in his hand, his eyes triumphant. That's enough. Leave her up a while. Let her think about what happens to traitors. But a sudden, new voice sliced abruptly through the noise, low, furious, and unmistakable. What the hell is going on here? The laughter died mid-breath, choked off. The crowd stiffened instantly. Heads turned toward the sound. Era's heart leapt, a painful collision of hope and terror. As the voice came closer, cutting through the clearing like a cold, sharp blade, the world had collapsed into a blur of cruel laughter and recording phone screens. When Marcus Jordan finally stepped through the tight ring of bodies, he had spent most of his young life mastering the art of invisibility. In classrooms, he always sat at the back, head low, never raising his hand, even when he knew every answer. But now, he could not unsee the sheer terror in Era's exposed posture. Her face was smeared obscenely with ink. Her voice cracked raw from pleading. Her dignity was being brutally wrung out of her in front of kids who had once sat right beside her in class. A hot, wild surge of shame and protective fury mingled in his chest. Through the den of cruel laughter, he suddenly remembered how Era had stayed quietly behind after class when his mother's illness was at its worst, silently slipping him her meticulously organized biology notes, never once making him feel like a charity case. He remembered her fierce, low whisper, "You're not alone, Marcus." Now she was utterly, publicly alone, and the entire world was watching. Something vital inside him snapped. He moved before his mind registered the action, shouldering violently through the wall of onlookers. He shoved Trent hard enough that the boy stumbled, nearly toppling right into Chad. The crowd gasped. No one ever touched Braden's crew. For a split second, Braden seemed almost amused. He glanced dismissively at Chad and Trent, then back at the stunned crowd, savoring the emerging spectacle. "Look at this, everyone. The knight in shining armor." His smile was pure venom. Or should I say, the janitor's son playing the hero. Laughter rippled out, ugly and gleeful. Marcus clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging sharp half-moons into his palms. He caught Era's face, pale beneath the blindfold, her trembling lips bitten until they bled. He saw the insulting words scrolled across her forehead, the ropes biting into her wrists, her slender legs shaking with exhaustion and profound fear. Fury boiled up inside him, bigger than his fear, hotter than his shame. He stepped closer to Braden. "Let her go. You want to join her?" Braden's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Maybe we can make this a double feature." For a moment Marcus faltered. His gaze darted desperately to the ring of students, searching for even a hint of support, but met only blank, recording faces. Some whispering, some filming, some studiously looking away. Braden circled Marcus, slow and theatrical. "Everybody listen up. This is Marcus Jordan. His mom cleans my house. Real rags to riches story, right? Don't make me call your mother and tell her you've been skipping chores." Marcus flushed crimson, heat crawling up his neck. The insult was old. Oak Hill was fundamentally built on this kind of sneering, codified hierarchy. But the casual, contemptuous way Braden spoke the words made every single one sting like a physical slap. He looked again for the teachers, remembering the empty lawn, the forced, artificial smiles at the start of the day. No help was coming. Braden's voice dropped, cold and precise. "Say another word, and my uncle will make absolutely sure your mom never works in this town again." "Think she can afford that, Marcus? Think you can?" A deep, ingrained part of Marcus wanted to shrink, wanted desperately to run, but Era's strangled, ragged sob pulled him back instantly. He remembered what it felt like to be completely powerless, to watch terrible things happen and do nothing. His mother's soft, steady voice echoed suddenly in his head. Courage isn't the absence of fear, Marcus. It's what you do anyway." He straightened his posture. "You touch her again, I'll call the police." "Police?" Braden's grin split wider, incredulous. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a thick wad of bills, hundreds of dollars, and slapped it forcefully into Marcus's face. The impact stung. The bills fluttered uselessly to the dirt ground. "My father owns the police. Every cop in this town cashes our checks. You think your call means a damn thing?" The crowd tittered, further emboldened by Braden's obvious bravado. Marcus stood frozen, his chest heaving, his fists clenched hard at his sides. The public humiliation burned, but he refused to take a step back. "Someone should," Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly but resolute. "If no one here has a spine, I guess it'll have to be me." Braden's easy amusement finally faded. He leaned in close, his voice dangerously venomous. "Last warning, Jordan. Walk away before I ruin both of you." "You already did." Marcus locked eyes with him, forcing his voice to steady. He looked again at the crowd. Kids who had suffered in bitter silence. Kids who had seen their own tiny hopes snuffed out by Braden and his crew. He wanted to scream at them, to beg them to remember every single time they'd been cornered, robbed, or mocked. But all he could do was stare at Era, at the raw bruises already forming under her skin, at the silent, desperate plea on her lips. He was terrified, yes, but not enough to yield the ground he stood on. He had already made his choice, and in that silent clearing, the entire social order of Oak Hill seemed to hang suspended, fragile as spun glass. His voice, a single desperate note, was pitched against the deafening roar of institutional fear and entrenched tradition. In the electric hush that followed, the very air seemed to hold its breath, shifting almost imperceptibly, signaling that a critical point had been reached. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, Marcus felt the profound, chilling weight of standing utterly alone. The atmosphere in the clearing was thick and metallic, pulsing with menace and the agonizing expectation of violence. This was the ancient, suffocating terror that had long held dominion over Oak Hill. Braden, imposing and arrogant, stood with his arms tightly folded across his chest, his jaw rigid. He fixed his cold stare on Marcus, daring him, challenging every fiber of his defiance. Marcus didn't waver. He held his ground, anchoring himself against the impulse to strike out, though his muscles vibrated with suppressed fury and the white-hot sting of public humiliation. Instead of attacking Braden, he pivoted slowly, ensuring his gaze swept across every face in the assembled crowd. His voice, strained but gaining resonance, sliced through the quiet. How many of you have lost your lunch money semester after semester? How many of you got tripped, shoved, ridiculed, called names until you felt like you were nothing? You tell yourself that if you just stay small, if you keep quiet, they'll eventually leave you alone. But look around. Look at Era. Does silence keep you safe? Deep in the crowd, a girl with tightly coiled, frizzy hair and a faded, ink-stained math club t-shirt chewed hard on her lower lip. Nearby, a boy known for his severe stutter nervously shifted his weight, his eyes betraying a painful, immediate memory. Further back, a tightly knit group of black students tracked the exchange, their gazes darting rapidly between Marcus and the unyielding figure of Braden. Marcus saw the paralyzing fear in their eyes, but he also saw the defiant spark beginning to ignite just beneath the surface. He challenged them directly. Next time, will it be you? His voice surged, forceful and unshakable now, amplifying against the surrounding pines. If you don't stand up right now, you are effectively telling them it's okay. You're saying that we deserve this violence. A low, undeniable murmur rippled through the assembled students. For the first time since the standoff began, Braden's signature sneer faltered, a slight tremor disturbing the mask of his confidence. Chad and Trent, his two hulking lieutenants, instinctively adjusted their stance, squaring their shoulders, primed for a physical fight. But the energy radiating from the crowd had undeniably shifted. A subtle change at first, like the turning of a tide, then accelerating rapidly. Marcus zeroed in on individuals. He looked directly at a painfully skinny boy wearing thick glasses, a perpetual target of Braden's cruelty. Jace, he stole your phone last semester, didn't he? And you, Emily, he didn't just make you cry, he did it in front of the entire class. And you? Marcus's accusing finger swept the perimeter, pulling long-held secrets into the harsh daylight, naming victims and their pain one by one. The effect was immediate and contagious. The corrosive shame that had kept them silent suddenly curdled, flipping violently into righteous anger. That anger gathered momentum, a palpable force pushing against the established hierarchy. Someone in the middle muttered loud enough to be heard. He took my laptop, too, and deleted everything. Another followed. He's been doing this for years. Era, still tied and miserable, her head bowed in silent suffering, registered the profound change in the atmosphere. A strange, unfamiliar sensation, hope, began to prickle warmly beneath her chilled skin. It was faint, almost unbelievable, but undeniably real. Marcus took another resolute step toward her. This ends now, he declared, locking eyes with her briefly. We do not have to live in fear. Not if we decide to stand together. Then, a clear, ringing voice broke the tension from the far edge of the clearing. I'm with you, Marcus. A tall black girl named Ariel, her frame taut with nervous energy, strode forward. Her hands were visibly shaking, yet her eyes were blazing with fierce, protective intent. Immediately, two boys moved to stand beside her. One white, one Asian, both notorious for their withdrawn demeanor and awkward, social silence. They moved up now, their fists tightly clenched, balled up with resolve. Others followed in a sudden rush. Half a dozen more black students, several recognizable scholarship kids, and one or two others who simply hated the suffocating presence of bullies more than they feared the consequences of fighting back. Their first steps were hesitant, almost a shuffle, but they grew firmer, louder, gaining solidarity with every new addition. Chad, Braden's heavy-set enforcer, attempted to physically block their path, but the surge of bodies was too swift and unified. Marcus, standing at the head of this nascent resistance, raised his voice, projecting it above the growing chaos. "Nobody touches her. Not again. Not today." Within seconds, they solidified into a defensive wall around Marcus and Era, a group of about 15 students strong. They were a strange, resilient mosaic of shared scars and freshly discovered courage. Trent, fueled by blind fury, lunged at Marcus, swinging a wild, amateurish punch. Marcus ducked just barely, but Ariel was quicker. She seized Trent's arm, twisting it up and behind his back with a surprising, tight grip. Jace, the skinny boy with glasses, launched himself from the side, tackling Chad low. Emily, the girl who had cried earlier, frantically yanked the excess rope right out of Chad's stunned hands. The ensuing skirmish was clumsy, frantic, and utterly glorious in its imperfection. A desperate, messy struggle fought purely for dignity. Braden stood momentarily frozen, then roared, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Get back! I swear. You touch me and you will regret it." But the old, hypnotizing magic of his authority had vanished. Chad and Trent flailed against the sudden resistance, their physical size useless as their chokehold on power slipped with every determined shove, with every single student who decided that fear was simply no longer a viable currency. Finally, Ariel and Marcus broke through the last line of defense and reached Era. Marcus's hands trembled violently as he fumbled with the complex knots, his voice catching with raw emotion. "It's okay. You're safe. We're here." Ariel simultaneously ripped the blindfold away. Era blinked painfully in the sudden light, tears streaming down her face. She immediately collapsed into Marcus's arms, her body racked by deep, uncontrollable sobs. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, collided with the crushing weight of humiliation in the same ragged breath. She clung to him desperately, her fingers digging hard into the fabric of his shirt as if terrified that he, too, might suddenly vanish and leave her exposed again. The larger crowd, witnessing Era's sudden freedom, did not erupt into applause, but into a stunned, electrified hush. For one critical moment, Braden looked genuinely rattled. His carefully maintained mask of absolute control disintegrated for a single, fleeting heartbeat, exposing the terrified, spoiled child hidden underneath. He recovered with practiced speed, but the flush of deep humiliation burned red-hot on his cheeks. He scrambled onto a massive, nearby granite boulder, desperate to reclaim the physical height and psychological authority he had lost, scrambling to claw back his slipping power. He pointed a shaking finger down at the ragged circle of students who had dared to stand up. His voice cracked, a horrifying fusion of incandescent rage and absolute panic. "You want to be heroes? Fine. Anyone who knocks down those black kids, anyone who drags them back here, gets $200, cash. Who's got the guts?" A sick, expectant silence descended, the latent seed of true violence, freshly watered by a volatile mix of greed, fear, and deep-seated envy, began to bloom instantaneously. The clearing exploded into motion. The promise of immediate cash had flipped a primal switch inside every simmering grudge, every buried resentment. Braden's offer, raw, ugly, and overtly racist, hung in the suddenly corrupted air, poisoning the very concept of the confrontation. For a brief, terrifying moment, no one moved. Then, the first attacker, a massive football linebacker notorious for his cheap shots and dirty play, lunged forward, his face mottled red with exertion and greed. He shoved violently through the watching crowd, heading straight for Marcus and the core group of defenders. His charge was the undeniable spark. Suddenly, the scene devolved into a chaotic brawl. Boys from the varsity team barreled in, swinging heavy, indiscriminate fists, their eyes fixed solely on Marcus and the students who had dared to defy the hierarchy. Some fought solely for the $200, others for the primal thrill of violence, but a terrifying number simply wanted to ensure they were on the winning, dominant side, regardless of the moral cost. The small ring of students protective around Era braced themselves for the impact. Marcus screamed above the din, "Don't let them through!" Ariel, already winded from twisting Trent's arm, instinctively threw her slight body in front of a hulking senior, attempting to block his trajectory with nothing but her bony arms and stubborn, magnificent courage. Fists cracked sickeningly against bone and jaw. Someone grabbed Marcus violently by the collar of his shirt and slammed him hard onto the dirt floor. He instantly tasted the coppery tang of blood, feeling a knuckle split his lip open, but he fought back instantly, desperate and clumsy, refusing the reflexive urge to curl up and submit. Next to him, Jace flailed wildly, his thick glasses knocked askew across his face, while Emily let out a raw, high-pitched scream for help that went unanswered. Trent and Chad, rejuvenated by the influx of backup, led the charge, their cruel, exhilarated laughter slicing through the air as they egged the new fighters on. "Come on, you wanted a show. Let's give him one," Chad barked, viciously shoving Ariel into the trampled dirt before lunging for Era's arm. Era's raw, chafed wrists protested violently as she tried desperately to scramble backward. Panic, cold and swift, closed in on her mind, trapping her inside a tight, airless box. She watched a heavy boot stomp down, missing her hand by a hair's breadth. Her vision blurred with tears and terror, then snapped into horrifying clarity as a pair of strong hands yanked her roughly upright. She stumbled, instantly feeling herself dragged away, forcibly separated from the protective presence of Marcus and Ariel. Her frantic, muffled screams were instantly swallowed by the overwhelming roar of the rioting crowd. "Let go!" she cried, kicking out wildly and uselessly. It felt like being caught inside a cyclonic storm. There were simply too many heavy bodies, too much surging, unadulterated rage. Unknown hands clamped vice-like around her arms, hauling her back toward the chaotic epicenter of the fighting. Through the mess, she managed to catch sight of Marcus, fighting furiously, hopelessly outnumbered, severely battered, yet fundamentally unbroken. Close by, the heavy plastic of a football helmet struck the hard-packed earth, the sound a sharp, sickening crack amidst the chaos. A white boy in an expensive varsity jacket tackled one of the black students, sending them both rolling violently down the small slope. Ariel tried to intervene to pull the aggressor off, but she was brutally shoved aside and fell hard. For a terrible handful of seconds, the riot became a self-sustaining monster, fueled only by momentum. Bodies heaved and slammed together. Shouts turned guttural. Tears, curses, and fresh blood mingled tragically on the churned grass. The sick, contagious thrill of unleashed violence radiated outward, infecting the air. Many of the watching bystanders stood rooted to their spots, watching in silent horror but doing nothing, their feet seemingly anchored by the heavy, invisible chains of 100 years of silent, passive approval. Era struggled relentlessly. The pain was a raw, bright fire up her arms, the humiliation searing hot beneath her panic. She caught fleeting glimpses of faces. Some were twisted in maniacal laughter, others quickly looked away in studied denial. She thought she was almost certain. She saw a teacher standing near the edge of the picnic tables, but he paused only for a beat, then spun around and walked deliberately back toward the main lodge, choosing to pretend that the violence unfolding before him did not exist. Braden watched the entire spectacle from his high vantage point on the boulder, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles were white, his eyes wild with savage satisfaction. This was the precise moment he had engineered, a terrifying spectacle of dominance, definitive proof that Oak Hill, fundamentally, still belonged only to him. Suddenly, A sharp, guttural roar tore through the bloody air. A sound so unexpected, so saturated with genuine authority, that it instantly overpowered the chaos. Stop! The fighting froze mid-motion, as if a powerful spell had been violently shattered. Heads snapped up universally. Even Braden, high on his rock, paused, the rest of his command dying soundlessly in his throat. From the thick tree line strode Mr. Henderson, the school groundskeeper. His back was ramrod straight, like a flagpole, and his eyes carried the faded, heavy weight of wars barely survived. His stark white hair caught the late afternoon wind, and in his hands gleamed the unmistakable, weathered stock of a heavy hunting shotgun. He did not level the weapon, but the message it conveyed was cold and absolute. The crowd instantly parted around him, a subconscious ripple of old American instinct, respect for age, for the uniform of service, and for the specific kind of man who had buried friends on foreign soil and understood true violence. Henderson stomped to the absolute center of the wreckage, his boots sinking into the torn, bloodied grass, and swept a chilling gaze across the scene. His voice cracked out again, sharp and deafening as a thunderclap. Enough! Not another hand lifted. Not another punch thrown. You! He jabbed a rigid finger at Chad and Trent, who still clung to Era. Step back from that girl right now. They hesitated, paralyzed. Henderson, without breaking eye contact, pumped the action of the shotgun with a practiced metallic snap. The sound was so jarringly alien in that school setting, so utterly final, that a wave of sheer terror ran through the crowd. He then pointed the weapon directly at Braden, his eyes hard and unyielding as flint. Any of you feel like testing your luck? Henderson growled, low and dangerous. Try me. See how fast you hit the ground. I survived 2 combat tours in Fallujah. You think a bunch of pampered brats scare me? Absolute silence crashed down. So profound it seemed even the wind had ceased to blow. One by one, the aggressive boys in their varsity jackets slowly backed away from Era, their earlier borrowed bravado collapsing into meek fear. Henderson swept his gaze over the remaining students, his stare heavy and judging, like a final sermon. I don't care who your daddy is. I don't care who thinks they run this school. If I see one more act of violence on these grounds, I'll personally have every last one of you in handcuffs before the sun goes down. And you? He fixed his unblinking gaze entirely on Braden. Your family's money won't buy you a damn thing with me. Braden tried to force a sneer, but the expression withered on his face. For the first time in his privileged life, he looked truly irrevocably small. Marcus scrambled painfully to Era's side, helping her carefully to her feet. Both of them were shaking uncontrollably. Henderson slightly lowered the shotgun, his rigid posture softening just enough to gently place a massive hand on Marcus's trembling shoulder. You all right, son? Marcus nodded, his breath ragged, his eyes shining brightly with the pain and tears of relief. Thank you, sir. Henderson turned his steely glare back toward the remaining assembly, the very embodiment of moral outrage and the rough force of law, channeled through one battered Marine. Go home now. You tell your parents exactly what you did here today, and pray that they managed to raise you better than this. The remnants of the riot dissolved instantly. Kids slunk away in bruised, silent pairs and trios, avoiding eye contact. Braden hesitated, still clinging to the boulder, but even he recognized that the immediate battle was lost. For now, in the profound hush that followed, Era clung desperately to Marcus. The sky above them seemed to churn, mirroring the internal upheaval. The world they inhabited was irrevocably changed. Yet, beneath the imposed silence, new, colder battles were already beginning to brew. Ones fought not with messy fists, but with strategic power, hidden secrets, and the slow, relentless machinery of institutional revenge. The world that greeted Era the following morning felt immediately colder, tighter, a place designed to punish survivors as if defiance were the greatest, most destabilizing crime. She woke up profoundly sore, her wrists permanently lined with angry, inflamed welts. The memory of the coarse rope and Braden's cruel laughter felt sticky and toxic on her skin. Her mother hovered nearby, whispering fragile comforts, but the tense silence filling their home told the real story. Survival was not, by any definition, victory. Not here at Oak Hill. The school itself looked perfectly untouched by the recent violence. The American flag snapped briskly and proudly above the ornate entryway. The morning sun brilliantly gilded the pristine asphalt of the faculty parking lot. Yet, beneath this polished, deceptive surface, the news of the riot curdled and festered in every silent hallway. Students huddled in corners, exchanging nervous, vicious rumors. I heard Era attacked Braden first. Marcus started a gang fight. Did you see how much blood there was? Bones were confiscated. The stories were deliberately twisted, amplified, and legitimized by oblique morning announcements. Even those who had stood and cheered for Era's freedom the day before now kept their distance. Their eyes shuttered and unreadable, their voices lowered in fear of retribution. Era and Marcus were summoned together to Principal Skinner's office. Waiting outside, Marcus sat rigidly, his hands folded so tightly his knuckles were stark white, a visible effort to contain his rage. Era watched the blinking red light on the intercom, a small, cold, unforgiving eye, feeling its gaze pierce her. Principal Skinner's office was nauseatingly warm, decorated lavishly with staged family photographs and brightly colored Ivy League pennants, every inch curated to project effortless success and nurturing warmth. But seated behind the immense, mahogany desk was Skinner himself. His lips pursed into a thin, critical line. He was flanked by Braden's parents, the city's mayor and his impeccably dressed wife, radiating authority and wealth, their smiles sharp and undeniably weaponized. Braden himself lounged carelessly beside them, arms folded, a single pristine band-aid covering a small scratch on his cheek. He looked utterly bored, already having moved past the events of the previous day. Era's mother sat next to her daughter, wringing her worn hands continuously in her lap, her hospital scrubs still visibly creased from a sleepless shift. Marcus entered with his father, a man who held his worn hat carefully in his hands, his head bowed in a posture of ingrained respect and humility. Skinner opened the meeting with a theatrical, weary sigh, shuffling the thick folders stacked before him. "This is never easy," he began, employing the practiced tone of a grief counselor. "Violence in our community wounds us all, but Oak Hill must uphold standards of order." Braden's father, the mayor, cut in instantly, his voice smooth, confident, and dripping with certainty. "My son, who is a victim in this, was brutally attacked by a coordinated mob. My office has been inundated with calls from concerned, influential parents all morning. This was not a fight. This was a calculated assault." Era stiffened with indignation, but her mother squeezed her hand tightly under the table. "My daughter was the victim," she managed, her voice trembling despite her effort to control it. "You should see the marks on her. Look at her wrists. Why aren't you punishing the ones who tied her up and hurt her?" Skinner's eyes narrowed slightly, hardening. "Mrs. Thomas, I assure you, we have reviewed all available evidence. Our faculty saw the aftermath, not the beginning. According to several key statements, your daughter and young Mr. Jordan were the instigators. They incited the violence, whipped the students into a frenzy, created chaos, and endangered both property and lives." Marcus looked up, utterly incredulous. "That's a total lie. We stopped them from hurting her. We were defending ourselves." The mayor's wife, dressed in an immaculate cream suit, cut him off, her voice sweet and unervingly sharp as a scalpel. "Marcus, dear, we know it's terribly hard to adjust to a new environment like Oak Hill, but we expect respect for authority here. Your mother works in our home. We value her very much. We would hate to see this unfortunate mistake jeopardize her employment with us." A slow, burning wave of utter humiliation crept up Marcus's neck and flooded his face. Skinner continued his summary relentlessly, unaffected by the raw emotion. "As a result of this comprehensive review, both Ms. Thomas and Mr. Marcus Jordan are suspended for 2 weeks for instigating a gang-related riot and recklessly endangering students." Era's mother recoiled physically. "Suspended? After everything she suffered?" How can you do this? Skinner's manufactured warmth vanished, replaced by a cold, granite glare. I will not argue this point any further. Any further disruption, Mrs. Thomas, and I will be forced to formally reconsider your daughter's eligibility for future academic programs. He fixed his severe gaze directly on Era. Remember, colleges do not look kindly on disciplinary records. Think very carefully before trying to make a scene out of this. Tears spilled relentlessly down Mrs. Thomas's tired cheeks, and she pleaded, desperation twisting her features. Please, Principal Skinner, I work nights, sometimes double shifts, so she can have a better future. She's a good girl. Top of her class. Don't do this to her. Skinner cut her off mercilessly. And perhaps, Mrs. Thomas, you should have taught her better to avoid trouble in the first place. His tone was clinical, almost bored. Our responsibility is to the integrity of this community, not to individuals who undermine our reputation. Braden's father pressed the advantage, sealing the verdict. We all have to make sacrifices for the good of the school. It's unfortunate but necessary. Marcus's father, who had maintained a respectful silence throughout the ordeal, finally stood up, his voice heavy with righteous bitterness. If this is what you call justice, it's justice only for the rich and the white. A profound, charged silence followed this indictment. Skinner simply tapped the folders together, the sharp sound sealing their fate. That will be all. The meeting concluded not with any form of resolution, but with utter, draining exhaustion. As they filed out of the polished office, Era caught Braden's look of satisfied triumph and the mayor's cold, absolute nod. The message delivered was indisputable. Power always chooses its own side, and anyone who dared to step out of line would pay a devastating price. Outside the suffocating office, Mrs. Thomas leaned against the wall, sobbing quietly, her shoulders shaking with defeated grief. I'm so sorry, baby. I tried everything. Era held her mother, swallowing the hot, metallic taste of bitterness that filled her mouth. She felt the trap snapping shut, the realization that they were utterly outnumbered and deliberately unseen by the people in charge. Marcus looked at Era, a profound, crushing guilt etched across his face. We did the right thing, though, didn't we? He whispered, desperately needing validation. Era opened her mouth to reply, but the words felt too heavy and too hollow to speak. She looked down the length of the empty hallway, the sound of Skinner's office door closing echoing behind her like a final hammer blow. His last, specific threat echoed brutally in her memory. Asterisk, if you make any more noise, I'll make sure she never gets into college. Her file is in my hands. Asterisk, for the first time, facing the reality of her shattered future, Era truly considered giving up. But then she glanced at Marcus. Something small but fierce flickered in his eye, a stubborn, defiant glint, a fragile piece of hope refusing the mandate to die. Asterisk, sometimes justice doesn't arrive in broad daylight, she thought. Sometimes it starts as a secret, passed from hand to hand, growing stronger only when hidden in the dark. Night fell hard and fast over Era's small house, pressing in around the walls like a massive, developing bruise. She sat at the worn kitchen table, the single overhead bulb flickering weakly above stacks of untouchable homework. Her mother moved silently between the kitchen and the small living room, only audible through the heavy, suppressed sighs she thought Era couldn't hear. On the counter, the formal suspension letter lay open, a tangible threat printed in crisp, official language, already heavy with the weight of unforeseen consequences. Marcus showed up shortly after dinner, his sneakers scuffed and dusty from hours of pacing. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, his shoulders hunched with defeat. You holding up? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. He looked more profoundly tired than Era had ever seen him. Era merely shrugged, clinging to a single weary statement. That's all there is. Her eyes remained fixed on the damning letter, willing herself to burn right through the paper with sheer force of will. Marcus sat down across from her, hands folded tight. I told my dad everything that happened. He says we just have to let it go. He paused, then added, the bitterness sharp in his throat. He says it's too dangerous to fight people like them. He says that's just how it works. That's how it works, Era repeated, testing the phrase, the words tasting like profound surrender. They lapsed into a deep, painful silence, the small room stretching under the immense weight of what had been done to them and the unspoken fear of what was still coming. A tentative knock at the front door startled both of them violently. Era's mother answered, her face tightening with immediate suspicion, which only eased when she recognized the caller. Toby Greer, the unofficial tech genius of the robotics club. He hovered nervously in the hallway, his backpack clutched tightly against his chest, his round glasses fogged from the humid night air. Era blinked. She had barely exchanged 5 words with Toby outside of mandatory group projects. He was defined by his quietness, his preference for always sitting near the exit, and his constant tinkering with obscure electronics while the rest of the high school universe revolved without him. Sorry, Toby started, breathless with anxiety. Can I talk to you? Era nodded, waving him inside. Marcus frowned deeply but shifted aside to allow the visitor space. Toby's hands shook visibly as he carefully set his heavy backpack onto the kitchen table. He avoided looking directly at either of them. You know, Principal Skinner took everyone's phones, right? He claimed it was to protect privacy and stop rumors. He made all of us unlock them. Then he personally deleted every video and every single picture from yesterday. Toby finally glanced up, his expression a tortured map of fear and profound guilt. I know, Era confirmed quietly. They made sure there's no proof left. Toby hesitated, his breath hitching, then slowly unzipped his backpack and carefully pulled out a small, battered black case. But I didn't have my phone out. I was testing the robotics club's new flycam. They said we could get extra credit if we filmed the lake at sunset. He swallowed hard, visibly struggling to speak. It recorded everything. By accident. The whole thing. I saw what they did to you. Marcus's mouth dropped open in shock. Era felt her pulse leap and race. A desperate battle between crippling doubt and a sudden, fragile hope consuming her. Why didn't you tell anyone right away? Marcus demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. Toby flinched, his shoulders curling inward protectively. My dad works directly for Mayor Mercer. I wasn't supposed to be flying the drone outside of designated times without express permission. And if anyone finds out I filmed the riot, my dad could lose his job. He cast a frantic glance toward the closed doorway, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Skinner scares me. Braden scares me. If they find out, Era understood instantly. The identical, suffocating web that held her and Marcus pinned down was now wrapped tightly around Toby's own precarious life. The system was designed to protect itself, efficiently and ruthlessly. It didn't matter what the color of your skin was. If you weren't already at the absolute top, you were always just one single mistake away from catastrophic disaster. She forced her voice to remain steady and calm. Toby, you have the proof. They can't erase it if it's not on a school-controlled device. Toby's hands were shaking so hard they blurred as he extracted a micro SD card from a slot in the case. It was tiny and unassuming, yet felt impossibly heavy, gleaming like a lifeline, bright as a lifeboat in the desolate room. It's all here, he whispered desperately. The exact moment they tied you up, Braden handing out the cash bribe. Even them stomping on and trashing your phone, Era. A long, profound silence settled over the kitchen. Marcus looked urgently from Era to Toby, the decision already made in his expression. We have to use this. This is our only chance. Toby shook his head vehemently, fresh panic flooding his eyes. They'll know it was me. My dad. He needs his job. Please, I just came here because I wanted you to know there was something. I didn't want anyone else to get hurt because of my silence. Marcus reached quickly across the table, gripping Toby's shoulder firmly. Toby, listen to me. Your silence isn't protecting anyone. It's killing her future. It's killing all of ours. You have a choice right now, fear or dignity. That's the entire choice. You decide if you want to hide forever, or if you're brave enough to help us finally stop this. Toby's face twisted. Fear, guilt, and a sliver of desperate hope swirled together in his eyes. He pressed the micro SD card into Era's waiting palm, his hand clammy with terror. I'm sorry. Just don't tell them it was me. Please. Era nodded, gripping the small card so tightly she worried it might snap. We won't. Thank you. A floorboard creaked somewhere down the hall. Era's mother peeked in, her tired eyes questioning the intensity of the meeting. Era shook her head slightly, seamlessly concealing the card deep within her jeans pocket. When Toby finally left the house, Era felt a fragile shard of hope pierce the thick blanket of despair, if only for a fleeting second. Era turned to Marcus, her eyes wide with a terrifying certainty. This changes everything. But as her fingers closed around the tiny plastic SD card, she didn't feel relief. She felt the cold weight of absolute understanding. The truth, when unleashed, could either be the cure that saved you or the weapon that destroyed every last thing you loved. With Skinner's low, malicious warning still echoing in the silent corridors of her mind, Era knew with chilling clarity that the real fight, the one that would cost them everything, was just beginning. Saul Bledsoe's law office was a casualty of time and neglect, a dusty outpost wedged mournfully between a pawn shop with boarded-up windows and the neon glare of a predatory payday loan storefront. The windows were perpetually filmed over, opaque with the residue of decades and the grime of heavy diesel exhaust. The battered sign above the door, its paint peeling like sunburned skin, proclaimed, Bledsoe and Associates. But anyone in this forgotten quarter of town knew there had been no associates for years, perhaps a decade or more. A single, weak lamp struggled to burn inside, casting more elongated shadow than useful light. The air in the reception area was heavy and stagnant, smelling faintly of stale whiskey, mildewed carpet, and the papery decay of forgotten case files. A grim sanctuary where the forgotten and the raging came to seek absolution. Era stood rigid on the cracked sidewalk, the SD card in her pocket radiating a phantom heat, almost burning a hole through the fabric. Her mother gripped her hand with bone-white knuckles, her gaze darting nervously up and down the street, checking the shadows for unseen threats. We can still leave, Era, she whispered, her voice thin, fear woven into every syllable. We don't have to walk in there. Era shook her head once, sharply. If we don't try now, Mom, we don't just lose this fight, we lose forever. She pushed the door open. The brass bell above them jingled a weary, reluctant chime of hope that sounded immediately swallowed by the stale air. Inside, Saul Bledsoe was entrenched behind a massive, scarred oak desk. His sleeves were rolled haphazardly past his elbows, his shirt rumpled, and his hair stood up in defiant, white tufts. He held a heavy glass tumbler of cheap bourbon, nursing it like a vital organ. The shelves surrounding him sagged under the weight of outdated legal tomes and dusty, tarnished trophies, each item a haunting ghost of a better, different life. He looked up as they entered, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep or drink, but unsettlingly sharp. You're late, he grunted, the ice clinking aggressively in his glass as he gestured toward the two threadbare visitor chairs. Let's be clear up front. I don't do lost causes, and I sure as hell don't do charity. Who sent you? Era's mother answered, her voice trembling, but imbued with a desperate, determined edge. We were told you understand how this town truly works, Mr. Bledsoe. We were told you fight for people who have been told they don't stand a chance. Saul snorted, swirling the melting ice in his amber drink. That was a long damn time ago. He subjected them to a cold, professional assessment, noting the ugly bruises on Era's arms and the rigid, stiff way her mother held herself, trying to contain her terror. Let me guess, he drawled, his tone heavy with prediction. Oak Hill. Someone's golden child decided he could go too far, and now you're paying the price. Era hesitated for just a moment, then placed the SD card squarely in the center of the desk. We have proof, she said, trying to steady her voice and failing slightly. Video proof. It shows everything that happened. Her gaze locked on his. You used to fight the bullies in this town, Mr. Bledsoe. Please fight for us. For Marcus. For a long moment, Saul didn't move. He eyed the tiny piece of plastic with a complex mix of disdain and genuine dread. You know exactly who runs this city, don't you? You know what happened the last time I dared cross the Mercers? He waved his hand toward a clean, empty square on the wall, the precise spot where his state bar license used to hang. They burned me down. They took everything I had. Era's mother finally looked away, silent, defeated, tears tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. But Era pressed on, her voice rising with furious passion. You're not the only one who lost something, Mr. Bledsoe. I lost my future. I lost my dignity. And Marcus, he's next. If we don't stand up now, this cycle of cruelty will never stop. It will keep eating people alive. Something fierce and desperate in her words finally cut through Saul's cynical haze. He popped the SD card into his battered, obsolete laptop. The screen flickered violently, then sputtered to life. The small office was instantly filled with the shaky, terrifying images. Braden's horrifying sneer. Era, bound and blindfolded on the picnic table. The cold jeers of the watching crowd. The money-changing hands between the senior boys. Chad's chilling threats. The violence escalating, spinning sickeningly out of control. Saul watched it all, his jaw tightening into a knot of fury, his fingers digging painful grooves into the wooden edge of his desk. Then a different, older pain crept into his bloodshot eyes, a memory hollowing him out from the inside. The image of Era's helpless body reminded him of someone else entirely. A girl with his eyes, his stubborn chin, who was swallowed whole by the same exact brand of schoolyard cruelty 10 years ago. His daughter. He had been too late, too blind, too consumed by his own pride and ego to save her. The glass tumbler slipped from his nerveless hand, crashing onto the worn linoleum floor. Whiskey spread beneath his polished boots. He turned back to Era, his voice suddenly raw and stripped of its earlier cynicism. I cannot undo the past, he stated flatly. But I will be damned if I let them do this to you, too. Era's mother gasped, clutching her hands to her mouth. You'll help us? Saul nodded slowly, wiping his hand across his face. No charge. Not this time, and don't ever ask me why. He leaned forward, his demeanor serious. But you need to understand something right now. They will come for you. The mayor, the principal, every corrupt fat cat in this town who profits from this lie. They will smear you, they will threaten you, and they will probably do worse. Are you ready for that kind of war? Era glanced at her mother, seeing the terror fighting a fierce, sudden pride in her weary face. We're ready, Era declared, her voice firmer than she felt. We have to be. Saul's old fire, long buried beneath a decade of bitterness and bourbon, finally began to flicker back to life. He straightened his rumpled tie, pulled out a stack of yellow legal pads, and began scribbling notes at a furious, frantic speed. We can't just dump this footage online, he muttered, his mind already working the angles. Skinner will bury it in an hour. He'll cry fake video, get every pet judge he owns to sign off on a gag order. We need leverage. We need a place where they absolutely cannot shut us up. Era leaned closer, compelled by his energy. Where? Saul grinned, a sharp, feral expression that was both ferocious and terrifyingly hopeful. Public hearing, school board, local news, we hit them simultaneously. We need to create a spectacle so loud and so visible that the whole damn town has no choice but to look. He looked Era straight in the eye, his voice gravelly and low. I'm not just fighting for you, kid. I want Skinner's head on a pike. I want the Mercer throne burned to ashes. Era almost smiled, the first genuine physical reaction she'd had in days. Saul leaned back, nodding to himself, already sketching out the attack plan. We'll need witnesses, support from anyone else they've hurt and silenced. I'll make calls, but you keep that card hidden like it's gold. Trust no one, especially not the cops in this town. You hear me? Era nodded, clutching the tiny piece of digital evidence like a holy talisman. Saul's office, cramped, messy, and haunted by the ghosts of his past, suddenly felt like the safest, most dangerous place in the world. As the pale dusk bled into the oil-stained parking lot, Saul Bledsoe poured the remaining whiskey down his sink drain. He pulled his old, dusty navy suit from the back of the closet, shook off the cobwebs, and dialed a number he hadn't touched in nearly 10 years. A new, unexpected storm was brewing for Oak Hill, one that even the arrogant Skinner wouldn't see coming until it broke the windows. And for the first time since the picnic, Era wondered if justice, slow and battered as it might be, might finally have a fighting chance. That Friday night, the Oak Hill High Gymnasium glowed a pretentious, buttery golden white, decorated with banners proclaiming, "Oak Hill, proud past, bright future." The annual fundraising gala was always a spectacle of curated privilege. The air thick with classical music, forced laughter, and the expensive scent of catered steak, all masking the deep moral rot festering underneath the surface. Here, parents wearing pearls and custom-tailored suits congratulated themselves for cultivating a community of excellence, all while diligently turning a blind eye to the true cost of that perceived excellence. Era, officially serving her unjust suspension, sat alone at home in the profound silence. The distant whir of her mother's vacuum cleaner in the next room did nothing to drown out the spectral voices that haunted her memory. Her inbox was overflowing, a slurry of anonymous threats, veiled insults, and patronizing advice instructing her to just stay quiet. None of it was kind. But at Oak Hill, the show and the elaborate charade of virtue went on. Braden Mercer arrived at the gala in his brand-new white sports car, the engine roaring unnecessarily long, just to ensure every wealthy attendee noticed the new acquisition. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit and a fixed smirk, greeting his father, the mayor, with a practiced handshake and his mother with a superficial peck on the cheek. The mayor beamed, swelling with false pride. "My boy," he announced loudly to no one in particular. "Always a winner." Principal Skinner worked the crowded floor with his usual oily, practiced charm. "We are so profoundly proud of our students, our dedicated staff, and our tradition of moral leadership," he purred into a microphone. He didn't mention Era. He didn't mention Marcus. He didn't need to. Tonight was consecrated to the celebration of fabricated heroes, not embarrassing scandals. When the local news crew arrived, invited, of course, Skinner delivered a polished speech focused on the virtues of resilience and community standards, painting Oak Hill as an untouchable beacon in an otherwise wayward world. At the absolute apex of the evening, he called Braden to the stage. The band went respectfully quiet. The massive spotlight gleamed mercilessly off Braden's unnaturally slicked hair. "It is my distinct honor," Skinner intoned, "to present this year's Outstanding Student Award to Braden Mercer, a young man who exemplifies the highest values of Oak Hill, determined, courageous, and a true leader." The applause was thunderous and sustained. The mayor's eyes shone with proprietary pride. Braden grinned, waving condescendingly to the adoring crowd. Photographers snapped dozens of flash pictures, capturing a flawless tableau of privilege, unquestioned power, and absolute impunity. Backstage, the catering staff whispered nervous gossip. One of the janitors, a small, tired woman who had witnessed this charade for 20 years, shook her head slowly. "They give him a trophy for hurting people," she muttered bitterly. "Nothing ever changes here." In the dimly lit parking lot, Saul Bledsoe sat low in the worn vinyl seat of his aging Buick. A thick manila folder rested precariously on the steering wheel. He watched the parade of entitled guests arrive, watched the casual exchange of money at the donation tables, and took meticulous notes in his battered leather ledger. He was invisible here, just another fixture, easily mistaken for service staff, and that anonymity suited him perfectly. He had spent days digging, leveraging old favors. A faded friendship in city records, a cousin in the accounting office who owed him a crushing debt. It hadn't been difficult at all. Greed, Saul knew, always left sloppy fingerprints, especially in a place where the same three powerful families wrote all the rules. The numbers told a clear, ugly story. The school's dedicated field trip fund, a tidy six-figure sum meant to cover charter buses, meals, and qualified adult chaperones, had completely vanished weeks before the picnic debacle. Instead, the school had hired a single, poorly paid security guard for the entire site and paid cash for vague, miscellaneous expenses. The bulk of the money, however, had reappeared in a local car dealership's ledger. A massive down payment for the gleaming white sports car now parked ostentatiously outside the gym, purchased precisely in Braden Mercer's name. Saul slowly thumbed through the crisp paperwork, a slow, predatory smile curling on his lips. Not just cruel, he muttered to himself, the words tasting like victory, but greedy, and greed always leaves tracks. He carefully tucked the damning files into his briefcase and stepped out into the cool evening air. Every gut instinct told him this was what he had been waiting for. Proof, not just of individual teenage evil, but of deep, systemic rot protected by the city's highest offices. Inside, the party grew louder. Skinner toasted the board. Braden basked in the manufactured praise. The mayor enthusiastically glad-handed the largest donors. No one mentioned the suspension, the bruises, or the devastating silence that had swallowed two of Oak Hill's potentially brightest students. But Saul knew this was the hairline crack in their perfect wall. With the right pressure applied, the whole edifice would come tumbling down. He watched Braden's car keys dangle from the boy's careless fingers, gleaming in the fluorescent light, keys bought with stolen futures. Saul's mind raced, already laying the intricate groundwork for the legal trap. He would hit them where they lived, their money, their reputation, and the cherished lie of their perfect order. Just before midnight, Saul left the gala, unnoticed and unremarked upon. He drove home with the manila folder resting on the seat beside him, one hand gripping the wheel, the other forming a silent, determined vow. They're not just evil, he repeated mentally. They're profoundly careless, and careless people always get caught. He flipped open his phone, dialing a contact he hadn't spoken to in years. A local reporter with a bitter axe to grind and a demonstrable knack for exposing entrenched corruption. As the night deepened, Saul plotted every move, every countermove. Tomorrow, the world would learn that Oak Hill's true tradition wasn't excellence. It was a calculated cover-up. And this time, the truth had teeth. The first domino was ready to fall. The next morning dawned thick with oppressive heat and a pervasive foreboding. At the city hospital where Era's mother worked the graveyard shift, every tick of the wall clock felt heavy and pregnant with threat. The break room was empty, permeated only by the sharp, institutional scent of disinfectant and the tired clatter of her ceramic mug against the table. She massaged her aching wrists, her mind still replaying the humiliating suspension meeting, the sight of her daughter's bruised arms, and the way Principal Skinner's voice had closed around their future like a crushing fist. She was replacing her surgical mask when the door opened and a man in a flawlessly tailored suit stepped in, far too composed and polished for the early hour. He was not a patient. He was certainly not a doctor. His gaze flicked over her ID badge with a cold, professional disinterest. "Mrs. Thomas," he said, his tone perfectly polite, yet completely wrong, like a skilled surgeon asking permission before making the first, irreversible cut. She nodded nervously. "Can I help you?" He offered a thin, bloodless smile. "My name is Foster. I work for City Hall." He set a slim leather folder on the table and sat down without waiting for an invitation. "You know precisely why I'm here." A deep, bone-chilling cold rippled through her. "I'm just here to do my job." Foster leaned in, dropping all pretense of cordiality. "Your daughter is causing a considerable amount of trouble for some very important people, Mrs. Thomas. The mayor's office is concerned this prospective lawsuit might severely embarrass the entire town and, regrettably, the hospital." His eyes held hers. "Now, you certainly wouldn't want to put your devoted employers in a difficult position, would you?" Her throat dried instantly. "I have the right to defend my child." He shook his head slowly, as if pitying her simplistic view of the world. "That's not the operative question. The question, Mrs. Thomas, is whether you wish to retain your nursing license." He tapped the folder. "The board, has been reviewing your overtime records quite closely. And your patient complaints. It would be very simple for them to find something substantial unless, of course, this lawsuit completely disappears. Think about it. Jobs are hard to come by these days. Single mothers, particularly, have to be extremely careful." Her heart hammered against her ribs, an equal mix of white-hot rage and paralyzing terror. "Are you threatening me? I am offering you a viable way out." He stood up, smoothing his suit jacket, and dropped a pristine white business card onto the table. You know how to reach me. But the mayor expects this situation to end now. For your own sake, Mrs. Thomas, make the right choice. He left as abruptly as he'd arrived, leaving the room feeling colder than before. Mrs. Thomas sat frozen, the card burning like an ember in her palm. That night, she walked home in a daze. The heavy summer air pressed down on her, thick and suffocating like grief. She replayed the conversation repeatedly, each word a knife, methodically cutting away her remaining hope. Every step she took felt heavier. When she finally unlocked the door, Era was waiting, her eyes dark with worry and exhaustion. "Mom!" Era rose from the couch, her voice gentle and concerned. Mrs. Thomas broke. She collapsed into a kitchen chair, shaking uncontrollably, her hands clamped over her face. "They came for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They said I could lose everything if you don't stop. Your college fund, my job, all of it. I'm so sorry. I tried to protect you, Era, but I can't fight these people. They're too powerful." Era's chest ached with a sudden, devastating blend of guilt and cold fury. She thought of all the years her mother had worked double and triple shifts to afford textbooks. How she had hidden her exhaustion and pain so Era could focus on her dreams. Now, those cherished dreams were being weaponized against them. A memory surfaced, unbidden. The warm, rough-edged sound of her father's voice. The way he used to speak to Era during terrifying thunderstorms. "Bravery isn't never being afraid," he'd said. "It's doing what's right even when your hands are shaking so hard you can barely stand." He had died when she was 10, but his lessons had lingered, providing a quiet, internal armor pressed between the lines of her mother's frantic warnings. Era knelt, wrapping her arms tightly around her mother's trembling shoulders. "If we give up now, Mom, they will do this to the next person. To the next girl who dares to speak up." Her voice was soft but absolute. "You didn't raise me to back down from bullies." Mrs. Thomas sobbed harder, clutching her daughter desperately. "I just want you safe, Era. I just want to keep my job. I can't lose you too." "You won't lose me," Era declared fiercely. "We will fight together. But if we let them scare us into silence, they will never, ever stop." For a long time, they stayed like that, mother and daughter in the dim, silent kitchen, holding onto each other against the looming darkness. Later, Era sat awake in the quiet house, the SD card pressed hard into her palm. She watched her mother sleeping fitfully on the couch, breath uneven, her brow still furrowed in troubled dreams. A molten rage churned in Era's stomach, a rage that demanded action, not silence or retreat. She turned over her father's words again and again, the sound of them steadying her, making her braver than she had any right to feel. Maybe the world was inherently stacked for people like Braden Mercer and Principal Skinner. Maybe the deck had always been rigged against families like hers. But as long as she had breath, Era would not bow. She would not let their threats erase the verifiable truth. The next morning, Era called Marcus, her voice hard and sharp as iron. "We can't post the video online," she stated simply. "Saul was right. They'll bury it or just claim it's fake. We need somewhere completely public, somewhere they can't possibly shut us out once we start talking." Marcus's voice crackled with a tired but suddenly vibrant hope. "I know just the place," he said immediately. "The school board's next meeting is in 3 days. It's public access televised. Nobody can legally stop you from speaking during the public comment section." Era nodded, a blazing determination burning in her chest. "Then that's where we'll do it. Not merely for revenge, or even just for justice. For all of us," she whispered, looking at her sleeping mother, at the faint morning light seeping through the curtains. And for the first time in days, the suffocating weight of fear lifted, replaced by something much sharper and stronger. Resolve. She slipped the SD card into her pocket. This was not just her fight anymore. As the first birds of the morning began to call, Era knew exactly what she had to do. The school board meeting was usually the kind of unremarkable small-town spectacle that instantly faded into the background. A tiresome parade of budget charts and obligatory applause for retiring gym teachers. But tonight, the high school parking lot overflowed, headlights slicing dramatically through the dusk. Era stepped out of Saul's battered Buick. Her nerves wound so tight she could feel them humming in her teeth. Inside, the boardroom buzzed with an unusual density of bodies and high expectation. At the long table, Principal Skinner sat in his best dark suit, fingers steepled beneath his chin, projecting an image of righteous, immovable control. At his side, Mayor Mercer adjusted his tie, his lips pursed with manufactured boredom. Braden lounged visibly behind them, his jaw set in an expression of carefully crafted innocence, hands folded neatly in his lap like a schoolboy waiting for a staged apology. Cameras glinted along the back wall, the public access TV crew broadcasting the proceedings live for any of the elderly citizens tuned in across town. Rows of parents filled the rigid chairs, some merely curious, others visibly bristling with preconceived judgment. A nervous knot of teachers stood at the back, exchanging anxious, silent looks. Saul nudged Era gently in the ribs. "You ready, kid?" he whispered. She nodded, gripping the small flash drive in her pocket so tightly that her knuckles were bloodless white. Skinner called the meeting to order with a single, sharp tap of his gavel, his voice syrupy and slow. "Let me begin by addressing recent, isolated incidents at Oak Hill. Our commitment to discipline is absolutely unwavering. We maintain the highest standards of behavior and community. There will be no tolerance for unrest or disrespect among our student body." He droned on, laying out the sanitized, highly edited version of the picnic riot, the supposed gang violence, and the hard choices the school had been forced to make in the name of order. A scattered wave of applause sputtered from the mayor's loyal supporters. When he finally finished, Saul rose immediately, clearing his throat with a loud, theatrical rasp. "Mr. Chairman," he announced, his voice ringing out, echoing off the high ceilings. "My client, Era Thomas, formally requests her 5 minutes as a citizen, per the board's standing bylaws." The board chair, a tired-looking woman with heavy bags under her eyes, nodded wearily. "You have 5 minutes, Ms. Thomas." Saul led Era forward. As they approached the microphone, Mayor Mercer leaned conspiratorially toward the nearest security guard and murmured something low and sharp. Seconds later, the guard moved to block Saul's path. The mayor barked, "We are not interested in further disruption." Cut their time short, but the chairwoman shook her head, her voice trembling slightly with contained anger. "It is their right, Mr. Mayor. Step aside." Era faced the room, every single eye fixed intensely on her. Her voice caught painfully in her throat. She glanced at Saul, who gave her a silent, burning look of encouragement. She glanced at her mother, sitting rigid in the front row, twisting a tissue into ragged shreds. Era didn't speak. Instead, she walked determinedly to the podium, plugged the flash drive directly into the laptop connected to the large overhead projector, and pressed play. For a chilling moment, nothing happened. The board chair frowned impatiently. Then, the screen flickered violently with static. And then, the unmistakable drone footage filled the screen. The chaotic clearing, the tight ring of students, the unmistakable, brutal violence and cruelty that was the Oak Hill picnic. At first, the room reacted with confusion. Just another chaotic schoolyard scuffle. But then the images sharpened. Braden's sneering, arrogant face filled the screen, tying Era to the frame. His voice, amplified and inescapable through the room's speakers, echoed horribly. "Let's get it on camera, liar. Right where everyone can see it. She wanted to make a scene? Now she's the whole damn show." The entire room went instantly, deathly still. Skinner shot up so fast his expensive chair toppled backward with a crash. "Turn that off. This is out of order. Shut it down," he screamed, his polished veneer shattering. The mayor gestured furiously at the camera crew. "Kill the feed. This is illegal footage." But the chairwoman shook her head, her voice suddenly firm despite the tremor. "This is evidence, gentlemen. It stays on." As the damning footage rolled, Braden was shown distributing cash to the willing participants, ordering the crowd, Chad and Trent dragging Era back as the other students screamed and filmed the spectacle. The brutality, the profound humiliation, the mob's ugly glee. Everything played out in brutal, undeniable clarity. Faces in the audience twisted with shock, disgust, and dawning shame. A guard moved toward the projector table, intent on stopping the playback. But suddenly, a new, unexpected figure appeared in the doorway. It was Mr. Henderson, the grizzled, tough-as-nails school groundskeeper. In his faded marine jacket, he strode quickly down the aisle. He was not alone. Behind him came a handful of silent, formidable men and women in veterans' caps, their faces set in grim, unshakable determination. Henderson reached the front and immediately blocked the guard's path with his body, his voice ringing out with disciplinary authority. "No one," he commanded, "shuts this girl up. Not tonight." His fellow veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, forming an impenetrable human barricade between Era and the forces of silence. On the screen, Braden scrolled the word, "liar," across Era's forehead. Gasps and shocked mutters rippled through the stunned crowd. Era turned her face slightly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. She didn't need to explain anything. Her suffering was now their shared shame, exposed in full, brutal color for all of Oak Hill to see. The mayor's voice rose, desperate and thin. "This is slander. Deep fake. Nobody can prove this is real." But the evidence was too compelling, speaking louder than any denial. Era just watched as one by one, the carefully constructed pillars of Oak Hill's false virtue began to crumble. As the final seconds of the video played, the crowd's cruel laughter, Era's raw sobbing, Marcus's brave, futile stand. The room held its collective breath, suspended in a moment of shared horror and dawning outrage. Somewhere in the front row, a parent began to weep audibly. In the back, a teacher covered her face, unable to watch the revelation of her school's moral core. For one terrible, elongated heartbeat, the entire town waited for what must come next. And in that silent, shattering moment, justice finally had a voice. The second the video feed cut to black, the meticulously arranged boardroom ceased being merely a venue for a scheduled meeting. It transformed into a crucible, a stage for a reckoning that had been decades in the making. A dead silence hung heavy, charged and electric, before breaking apart under the crushing weight of collective moral outrage. The first reaction was a ragged, communal gasp of sheer horror and disbelief. Then, a woman in the second row, her face lined and hands visibly trembling, sprang to her feet. "How could you let this happen?" she choked out, her voice brittle with pain and betrayal. Another parent roared, the sound thick with venom. "Monsters, every single one of you." The psychological dam holding back years of compliant silence fractured, releasing a devastating tidal wave of pent-up fury. Dozens of parents surged forward, some clenching their hands into fists, others openly weeping the tears of long-delayed realization. "You call this leadership?" one bellowed. "Expel them all," a mother screamed. "That's my daughter's friend, the one you tied up." The air grew dense and suffocating with condemnation and righteous rage. People spilled from their expensive chairs, some blindly hurling crumpled programs and half-full water bottles toward the raised dais where Principal Skinner and Mayor Mercer sat, paralyzed and deathly pale. Braden, instantly losing his usual arrogant posture, physically recoiled, his carefully cultivated, cocky facade evaporating into a sweat of fear. The crowd's focus quickly shifted from the raw pain inflicted on Era to the spectacular exposure of a rotten system. A machinery of violence and complicity paraded before everyone who had ever paid a PDA fee, volunteered at the Booster Club, or worn the revered colors of Oak Hill High. Mayor Mercer attempted desperately to seize control, raising his hands in a futile gesture, his voice attempting to boom through the rising din. "This is a malicious fabrication," he shouted, the sound echoing hollowly. "Deep fake technology can manufacture anything these days. Do not let yourselves be fooled by a single doctored video clip." But the room erupted in unified disbelief. "Liar!" someone shrieked, slicing through the noise. "That's your son on camera paying kids to fight. We know your son. That's your voice, Skinner. How many times has this happened before, right under your nose?" A father, wearing a mechanic's oil-stained jacket, pushed his way to the very front. His face flushed scarlet with a mixture of tears and explosive rage. "You covered this up," he accused, pointing a shaking finger at the principal. "My kid came home black and blue last year," I complained, "and you said he fell during gym class. You dismissed me." Skinner attempted to rise to regain a semblance of authority, but a plastic water bottle struck his arm, forcing him back down. The crowd pressed closer, a unified force bound by mutual disgust and profound betrayal. Years of whispered rumors, silent suffering endured by marginalized families, and loyalty bought through political patronage finally combusted into fierce, immediate action. The older parents in the room, those who still remembered the town's difficult, segregated past, looked at Era and Marcus now not just with sympathy, but with a fierce, protective shame for their community's failure. Even some students lingering in the back, former silent admirers of Braden's toxic popularity, shrank deep into their seats, terrified by the severe, judging glares of their own parents. Suddenly, a small, white-haired woman, whose quiet demeanor belied a voice of steel, strode purposefully down the central aisle. She grabbed her own son, one of Braden's key crew members, whose face was blanched with shock, firmly by the collar. "Did I raise you to beat on girls for money?" she demanded, pure, incandescent fury radiating from her every pore. Before the boy could stammer a reply, she slapped him hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed through the room. Her voice trembled, not with regret, but with grief and rage. "You disgrace this family name. You disgrace yourself." The room froze again for a fleeting split second. Then, a wave of applause mixed with tears of release rippled through the parents. An overwhelming, audible approval of judgment served. The mayor stammered, "You don't know the whole story." But his weak words were instantly swallowed beneath thunderous shouts of "Resign!" and "Bring charges." The school board chairwoman, her own hands visibly shaking beneath the table, leaned into the microphone, her voice surprisingly steady. "Enough," she stated firmly. "This is no longer just about policy. This is about common decency, integrity, and the rule of law. There will be a full, independent investigation. Everyone involved, regardless of their position or connections, will be held accountable." Her gaze, hard and unwavering, locked first on Skinner, then Braden, then settled finally on the mayor himself. Oak Hill will never sweep this profound failure under the rug. Meanwhile, a swarm of reporters scrambled, trying to capture every frantic word, every raw tear, every accusation. Phones flashed and recorded incessantly. There would be no erasing this seismic shift. Skinner, his voice thin and truly desperate, frantically called for security. "Clear this room. Get them out of here now." But the hired guards hung back, uncertain and hesitant, facing down a flood of such unified, righteous anger. Through the chaos, Era stood, flanked by Marcus, Saul Bledsoe, and her mother, unsure whether she should weep in exhaustion or smile in fragile relief. The enormous, crushing weight of years seemed to lift just a little, replaced by a strange, trembling new hope. Suddenly, the main double doors to the boardroom crashed open. Sheriff Wallace, Oak Hill's newly elected police chief, a figure already known for his unyielding, stubborn sense of justice, strode into the room. His polished star badge gleamed under the overhead lights. The dense crowd parted instinctively as he made his way with calm authority to the front. His voice measured but commanding. "Everyone stay where you are," he announced, his authority instantly cutting through the noise. "Nobody leaves this building until we get official statements and thoroughly review this evidence. There will be order, and make no mistake, there will be swift consequences." For the very first time, the powerful adults on the dais, the mayor and the principal, looked truly afraid. As the parents slowly quieted down, a tense, breathless anticipation rippled through the room. The reckoning had only just begun. But the old, unspoken rules of silence, of protected power, and of absolute immunity were finally, definitively crumbling. Era, for the first time in her young life, saw that the hard truth, once exposed, could ignite a fire so bright and consuming that even the powerful could not extinguish it. The story was no longer just her private pain. It belonged to the whole town, burning too fiercely to ever be hidden again. The boardroom emptied slowly, chaotically, but the reckoning did not conclude. It merely changed venues. Hours later, Sheriff Wallace stood beneath the harsh fluorescent lights of the municipal building's press room. The flycam footage was paused on a frozen frame behind him. Braden's face twisted in command. Cash fanned out like irresistible bait. Wallace's voice carried the gravity of a decision that had been agonizingly delayed but was now utterly unavoidable. Based on the corroborated evidence presented tonight, he said, measured and clear, my office is formally opening a criminal investigation into multiple felonies, effective immediately. The word criminal ripped through the assembled crowd like a shockwave. Parents leaned forward, gripping the backs of chairs. Reporters scribbled furiously. The confidence of the old order, the smiling donors and silent power brokers, visibly wavered. Braden Mercer, Wallace continued, his eyes unwavering. You are being detained for assault, coercion, and incitement to violence. Chad Miller, Trent Hayes. You are being detained as well. Gasps sliced the thick air. A deputy stepped forward, followed closely by a second. Metal handcuffs glinted under the lights. Braden let out a single, sharp, hollow burst of laughter. This is a joke, he sneered, his voice cracking slightly despite his bravado. You can't do this. My dad. The sharp click of the cuffs abruptly terminated his sentence. Chad Miller tried to violently pull away, his panic instantly turning his forced confidence feral. I didn't do anything. He told us to. He stopped abruptly, his eyes darting frantically toward Braden, then toward Mayor Mercer across the room. The crushing weight of the room pressed down on him. The old, reliable protections were undeniably gone. Trent Hayes went utterly pale, his knees visibly softening as he was guided forward. Phones rose high. Camera lights flared fiercely. The crowd parted silently as deputies escorted the three boys down the aisle. Some parents clapped once, sharp and low. Others quietly wept in relief. A few stood frozen, staring at the raw, undeniable truth they had, until this moment, helped to ignore. Era watched, her breath caught tightly in her chest. She felt no triumphant joy, only a profound, trembling release, like a severely tightened knot finally, mercifully, coming undone after years of strain. Marcus stood beside her, his shoulders squared, his eyes wet but fixed and unblinking. Braden twisted against the restraints, frantically scanning the room, desperately searching for a lifeline. Dad! He shouted, his voice shattering completely. Dad! Tell them to stop, please. Mayor Mercer stood rigid and ramrod straight, his jaw clenched tight, his gaze fixed straight ahead. The cameras were still recording his every micro-expression. He did not move a muscle. He did not utter a sound. He let the moment pass, allowing his son's plea to vanish as if it belonged to a complete stranger walking by. The sheer, calculated betrayal hit Braden Mercer harder than the cold metal cuffs. At the police station, the atmosphere shifted rapidly from public spectacle to cold procedure. Paperwork slid across sterile metal desks. Statements were recorded meticulously. The flycam footage looped relentlessly again and again, its damning details utterly unforgiving. Saul Bledsoe watched from a quiet corner, arms crossed, his legal mind already mapping the inevitable consequences. In an isolated interrogation room, Chad Miller's youthful defiance had collapsed into sweat and shaking hands. He stared fixedly at the polished table, then nervously at the two patient, silent detectives who were simply waiting him out. Finally, he exhaled a long, thin breath. Do you want the truth? Fine. Skinner told us exactly where the cameras were and how to clear them out. Said the picnic was off the books, for safety and liability. Whatever. Then he showed us where all the blind spots were. He said nobody would ever see. The detective's pen paused. And the money? Chad swallowed hard. Came from the school field trip fund. Skinner signed it out in cash. Said it was cheaper than hiring real chaperones. He said donors would cover the rest later. Where did the rest go? Chad's voice was barely a squeak. The car, the white one. Braden's. The room went quiet. Across town, the high school felt profoundly different, hollowed out, stripped of its old, comfortable certainty. Teachers whispered anxiously in doorways. Students clustered together in stunned silence, recounting what they'd seen on their phones. A guidance counselor closed her office door and wept uncontrollably. The gleaming trophy case suddenly looked obscene. Principal Skinner sat utterly alone in his spacious office, blinds half-drawn, fingers steepled as if that posture could still somehow conjure authority. The phone rang once, then twice. He did not answer. He stared blankly at a framed photo of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Him smiling broadly beside important donors, the mayor's hand resting firm and proprietary on his shoulder. The past felt dangerously, impossibly close. When investigators finally arrived, Skinner stood up, forcing a brittle calm into his voice. "This is a gross overreaction," he asserted. "You have no warrant." They produced one. Boxes were opened. Files were lifted. A hidden thumb drive slid out of a desk drawer. A small, personal ledger surfaced, numbers neat, intentions ugly. The dominoes began to fall with a steady, irreversible rhythm that Skinner could not stop. Back at the station, Braden paced the holding room, his eyes red and his breathing ragged. He turned to face the mayor through the glass, his voice small now, stripped of all its power. "Dad, please." Mayor Mercer looked at his son, then past him at the hidden cameras, then at the waiting officers. His expression hardened instantly into something practiced and glacially cold. He straightened his tie. He turned and walked away. The sound Braden made then was not anger. It was a devastating, pure cry of profound loss. Sheriff Wallace addressed the press corps again just before dawn. "This investigation will be exhaustive and thorough," he declared. "No one is above the law. Not students, not administrators, and not elected officials." Questions flew. Wallace answered what he could, promising the transparency that Oak Hill had lacked for so long. Saul stood behind the cameras, satisfied not by vengeance, but by the irresistible momentum of justice. Systems do not collapse in a day. They crack under strain, then inevitably give way. Era returned home as the sky began to lighten, an exhaustion heavier than sleep settling deep in her bones. Her mother met her at the door, pulling her into a desperate hug that shook with raw relief. "You did right," she whispered, her voice rough. "Whatever comes next, you did right." Era nodded, pressing her face into her mother's shoulder. She thought of the ancient oak tree, of the sickening rope, of the ugly word burned into her consciousness. She felt the echo of fear, and then something steadier beneath it. At Oak Hill, announcements were abruptly canceled. Classes were delayed. Students sat with buzzing rumors instead of lessons. Marcus walked the halls again, no longer invisible but also not seeking attention. He passed the office wing and felt the air itself had changed. By noon, news vans lined the street like vultures. By evening, terse official statements were released. By night, the town finally understood what corruption it had protected and what truth it could no longer deny. And in the quiet after the first wave of justice, a darker, more complex realization spread. This was not the end of the story. It was merely the beginning, because as the last file was sealed and the last camera powered down, one truth remained unavoidable. Principal Skinner's complete, final fall had not yet been fully realized. The fate quietly waiting behind his office door was far more severe than a simple headline. By morning, the halls of Oak Hill High echoed with a strange, unsettled hush. The banners still fluttered above the trophy cases, and the clock still ticked its old, familiar rhythm. But every footstep carried a new, anxious caution. Something irreversible had been shattered. News vans idled at the curb. Satellite dishes pointed skyward, drawing the attention of the world outside. Inside, teachers clustered in nervous, hushed groups, trading the latest dire rumors. Some wept openly in empty classrooms. Others quietly rehearsed the truthful statements they knew they should have made years ago. The air felt brittle, electrified, Every locker and bulletin board was a silent witness to years of institutional complicity. Principal Skinner's office remained a fortress of futile denial. Blinds were drawn, lights were low, and papers were stacked in nervous, meaningless piles. He had barely slept a wink. Phone calls had come and gone. First from the mayor's office, then from the district superintendent, then finally from a cold, clinical voice he did not recognize. Federal investigators will arrive at 9 a.m. Be prepared to cooperate fully. The warning was precise, unyielding, and terrifying. He watched the parking lot through a sliver in the blinds and saw a pair of sleek, unmarked black SUVs roll to a controlled stop. 2 men and a woman in dark suits stepped out, their stride purposeful yet unhurried. Skinner desperately told himself it was just bureaucratic protocol. He was, after all, the principal of a prestigious school. Surely, this was all a terrible misunderstanding. Surely, his powerful friends in City Hall would make everything right. But his hands shook violently as he thumbed through files. Financial records, tuition invoices, security logs. He had already desperately shredded what he could, burning old, incriminating receipts in his office fireplace. Yet the pile of remaining evidence seemed to grow, not shrink. Sweat traced a cold path down his spine. His heart stuttered violently when the knock finally came, heavy, authoritative, and utterly unmistakable. The lead agent announced herself clearly. Special Agent Morales, FBI. Her badge caught the weak morning light. Principal Skinner, we are here to execute a federal warrant. Please step aside immediately. Skinner tried to protest, tried to summon his forgotten authority, but his voice collapsed into a pathetic whisper. This is all a terrible mistake. Morales's team swept through the office with silent efficiency. Cabinets were unlocked. Desks were searched. The shredder was found jammed solid with half-burned checks and private tuition invoices. Digital files were expertly copied. Emails were downloaded. The school's terrified bookkeeper, called in for the audit, trembled visibly as she recited the dubious transactions she had flagged and disastrously ignored for months. As the hours dragged on, the corridor outside filled with staff. Teachers who had long sat on the sidelines, administrative aides who had warned of missing funds, even the elderly janitor who had seen Skinner meet with Chad and Trent late one night and always suspected something more sinister was at play. Bit by bit, they approached Agent Morales, their hands shaking, their voices choked with years of suppressed shame. I saw him sign the trip vouchers and pocket the difference. I was explicitly told to delete that security footage and shut up. He said it was all for the school. I thought I had no choice. It began as a hesitant line. It grew into a steady, silent procession. Adults who had spent years swallowing their conscience were now desperate to unburden themselves. Morales listened patiently, recorded every word, and nodded somberly. Each confession was another stone in Skinner's rapid, public collapse. Inside the office, Skinner watched mutely as they boxed up his professional life. The photo of the ribbon cutting, his engraved golden nameplate, the framed Administrator of the Year award. One by one, the tokens of his stolen authority were stripped bare. He tried desperately to call the mayor, but the number went straight to voicemail. He tried the district attorney, but there was only static. His powerful allies were gone, evaporated the instant his protective shield cracked. He slumped in his chair, head in his hands, as Morales read him his rights in a flat, monotone voice. Principal Arthur Skinner, you are formally under arrest for embezzlement of public funds, destruction of evidence, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Please stand up slowly. Handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Cold metal, tighter and more real than he could have possibly imagined. Morales led him through the door and down the silent hallway lined with faces. Teachers, secretaries, even the cafeteria manager. Some glared openly. Some averted their eyes in pity. Not a single person stepped forward to offer him comfort. Word traveled fast. As Skinner passed the main entrance, students craned their necks to watch. A few cheered under their breath, but most simply stared, profoundly shocked to see the man who had ruled their lives now powerless and small. On the front steps, Morales paused for a necessary moment. News crews surged forward, microphones flashing, questions tumbling over one another, but Skinner could not, answer. His gaze darted past the frantic crowd and landed on a solitary figure by the school gate. Era stood still in the morning light, her hair pulled back tightly, her chin raised, her uniform crisp despite the storm raging behind her eyes. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply met Skinner's gaze with a look that cut deeper than any headline or sentence ever could. It was not victory, but pity. Not vengeance, but a deep, quiet sorrow for what unchecked power had twisted him into. He looked away first, shrinking into himself, just as the car door slammed shut and the agents drove Arthur Skinner away. A sudden, strong wind rippled the flags over Oak Hill. Inside, teachers gathered in the library and, one by one, signed formal statements. Some wept, apologizing aloud to the students they had failed through their silence. The board chair announced a full, uncompromising review of every policy and appointment made during Skinner's tenure. Whispers of genuine, timid reform buzzed in the electrified air. But for all the procedural justice achieved, the building felt heavy, perpetually haunted by years of corrosive silence and the deep, invisible scars they had left. Era watched it all, feeling both incredibly lighter and yet still profoundly burdened. Skinner was gone. The law had spoken clearly, but the ache in her chest, the echo of every slight and every silence, would not vanish simply with the clang of a cell door. Oak Hill had paid a steep, public price, but the difficult question lingered. Would wounds this deep ever truly heal? The external machinery of justice had completed its work, but the internal work of healing, the quiet, unseen labor of forgiveness and foundational change, had only just begun. A week passed, and the world outside Oak Hill had already begun its inexorable move to the next headline. News vans departed for new disasters. The local trauma headlines faded to small footnotes. But in the stubborn heart of the town, pain and deep reckoning clung fiercely, refusing to be swept away. The old oak tree stood exactly where it always had, its roots deep, its bark scarred by decades of carved initials and whispered secrets. A silent, ancient witness to the cycle of cruelty and the first, difficult break in that chain. On a crisp morning tinged with the undeniable promise of spring, the entire school gathered on the lawn beneath the ancient tree. There were no bright banners, no music, just a semicircle of somber folding chairs and a makeshift podium set directly into the grass. It was the first time in Oak Hill's long history that an assembly had been called, not for celebration or ceremony, but for a public institutional apology. Era stood quietly to the side, her hands clasped, feeling the immense weight of countless eyes, but also the respectful hush of genuine, nervous anticipation. Her mother was in the front row, sitting close beside Marcus's father. Teachers lingered behind the students, most of them subdued, some with red, tear-filled eyes. Saul Bledsoe, his jacket slightly rumpled but his posture proud, stood like a silent pillar of strength. Even Mr. Henderson watched from the very edge of the crowd, arms folded, his marine cap shadowing his weathered face. At the foot of the oak, the crude wooden frame, the one that had once held Era captive and bound, leaned awkwardly, visibly exposed, a hideous relic of the town's shame. The interim principal, a soft-spoken math teacher who had been thrust into this impossible responsibility, approached the microphone. Her voice wavered audibly, but her words cut straight through the morning hush. We gather today not for tired tradition, but for hard truth. Oak Hill, as an institution, failed its students. We failed all of you by allowing silence and fear to take deep, toxic root. Today, we attempt to start over, not with hollow promises, but with genuine accountability, with profound apologies, and with the hope that we might truly begin to heal. She stepped back. The silence swelled, and for a long moment, it seemed no one would move. Then, slowly, a boy in a bulky Letterman jacket, one of Braden's former fair-weather friends, stood up and crossed the damp grass. He stopped directly in front of Era, his head bowed low. I was part of it, he said, his voice low but startlingly clear. I stood there and laughed. I filmed some of it. I did nothing at all to help you. I'm sorry. No one should ever have to go through what you did. His words hung heavy in the air, trembling with the intense awkwardness of real, unadulterated regret. Others slowly followed. Emily, who had mercilessly taunted Era in the hallways. Jace, who had once called Marcus trouble behind his back. A girl from the cheer squad who confessed to sharing the sickening video in a group chat. Each apology was unique, some halting, some choked with shame, a few accompanied by visible tears. All were heard. One by one, they placed small slips of paper, handwritten apologies, and small, symbolic tokens at Era's feet. Some handed letters directly to Marcus. Others quietly hugged the friends they had once abandoned out of fear. A stillness settled over the lawn, deeper than before, as if the ancient tree itself was listening intently. Era felt the familiar nerves building in her chest as she approached the microphone. The world momentarily blurred. She saw only the faces of those she loved, the ones she had fiercely feared, and the ones who had finally, quietly, chosen to stand beside her. The words had lived within her for days. Now they found their rightful place. She took a deep, steadying breath. This tree saw everything, she began softly. It saw me at my worst, and it saw all of you at yours. It saw exactly what hatred and systemic fear can do to a community. But it also saw courage, people who stood up, who chose to change even when it was incredibly hard. Her eyes scanned the crowd, finding Marcus, her mother, Mr. Henderson, and the teachers who had finally come forward. I will never forget what happened here. I will never forget the pain I felt. But I also won't forget the ones who chose to finally speak up, who chose to sincerely apologize, who chose to try and be better than they were. Forgiveness is not forgetting the wound. Forgiveness is actively refusing to let what happened make us hateful, too. Is choosing not to pass the pain on to someone else. Her voice trembled slightly, but she kept going, growing stronger with every spoken word. We can't go back and undo the hurt that was done. But we can make absolutely sure this never happens here again. We can listen to each other. We can stand up for each other. And we can build something fundamentally different. Not for Oak Hill's reputation, but for the people in this circle, right here, right now. A profound hush settled, reverent and cautiously hopeful. Marcus joined her at the front, shoulder to shoulder. Together, they made the solemn walk toward the wooden frame, a grotesque skeleton of past pain. Its surface was grayed, the wood splintered and irreversibly warped by endless seasons of rain and neglect. Era reached out, her fingertips tracing the rugged grain. In that rough texture, she felt the echo of the recent agony, yet simultaneously, the formidable power inherent in the act of moving forward. Marcus, sensing the gravity of the moment, silently produced a small, utilitarian can of lighter fluid from his backpack. His hands were steady, focused. He looked toward Era for confirmation, and she gave him a resolute nod. She then knelt on the earth, pulled out a small packet, struck a match against the box, and together, they introduced the fire to the structure. The flames surged immediately, climbing with hungry, undeniable purpose. Orange light licked at the physical symbol of a dark memory, devouring the malice that had clung to the wood. The heat consumed what remained of that terrible, dark day. The assembled crowd watched, utterly transfixed, as the fire incinerated the last remnants of the heavy rope, the bindings that had held Era captive, and in a profound, invisible way, had held the entire school hostage to fear and complicity. Smoke curled high into the clear afternoon sky, carrying upward not only anger and regret, but a surprising, powerful feeling that almost felt like hope. When the frame was finally reduced to nothing but flickering embers and ash, Era turned slowly to face the group. "We are not defined by our scars," she said, her voice soft but carrying absolute conviction. "We are defined by what we choose to do next." A collective ripple of applause broke the silence, hesitant and uncertain at first, but then swelling rapidly, building into a powerful, cleansing release. It was a release not just for Era, the victim who had become the victor, but for Oak Hill itself. Marcus squeezed her hand tightly, the firelight dancing in his eyes. "It's finally over," he whispered, a sound of profound relief. She shook her head, a soft, half-smile gracing her lips. "No," she corrected him. "It's just beginning." In the weeks and months that followed, the apologies continued to arrive, sometimes slipping under locker doors in carefully folded letters, sometimes offered hesitantly over shared lunch tables, or whispered in the marginal safety of study groups. The teachers, spurred by the clarity of the conflict, implemented new, mandatory policies designed to prevent future silences. Students, newly empowered, formed an official diversity and advocacy council. The old, unspoken rules of pervasive silence that had governed the hallways began, at last, to crumble and give way to genuine conversation. But the memory of the fire, the charred patch beneath the old oak, lingered. It remained both a painful scar and an unshakable promise. The tight circle of cruelty had been broken, then painstakingly mended, never achieving perfection, never erasing the past, yet stronger now for having been remade by honest effort. As the students drifted away from the tree that afternoon, the late sun flickering through new, bright green leaves, Oak Hill felt, just for a precious moment, like a place where true healing was finally, truly possible. The school year was not yet complete, but for Era and Marcus, a genuine, undeniable hope finally grew strong in the enduring shadow of the oak. The dawn of something entirely new was about to break across their lives. Summer seeped into Oak Hill with the slow, inevitable certainty of forgiveness, a force softening the sharp, rigid lines of past conflict, aggressively greening the grass, and washing the halls clean of old, malicious echoes. The ancient oak tree wore a fresh canopy of leaves, new initials now lightly carved over the deeper, older scars in its bark, and for the first time in memory, the whole town felt light. This lightness didn't come from the erasure of pain, but from the immense emotional weight that had finally been openly named, shared collectively, and purposefully set down. Graduation day arrived, heralded by a brilliant blaze of sunlight and tangible promise. The gymnasium was filled to overflowing with excited families, enormous bouquets of flowers, and the jarring, continuous sound of folding chairs being scraped across the polished wooden floor. The graduating class of Oak Hill High lined up in their stiff blue robes, tassels swinging erratically, nervous laughter ricocheting sharply from the high rafters. For most of the students, it was merely a day of immense relief. The definitive end to sleepless nights, final exams, and petty hallway dramas. But for Era, it was something far more profound. It was a testament. It was tangible proof of survival. She clutched the edges of her printed speech, her hands miraculously steady, feeling the immense weight of what this singular moment represented, not just for herself but for history. Across the crowded gymnasium, Marcus caught her eye, flashing a quick, meaningful smile that spoke volumes. His father, sitting proudly beside Era's mother, wore a similar expression, both faces awash of pride, relief, and awe. Saul Bledo, having regained his composure and purpose, hovered discreetly at the edge of the stage, his tie slightly askew, his eyes shining back at her with a clarity and strength that had been absent for years. In the front row, Mr. Henderson, his marine cap immaculate and precisely placed, waited. An unspoken promise of continuing fidelity and respect was held rigid in his perfectly crisp salute. The principal, newly hired for the job and visibly nervous behind the microphone, welcomed the assembled crowd and began listing the scholarship winners. But distinct murmurs began to spread and build as Era's name was announced for the school's highest academic honor, full tuition and a stipend to a top-tier university. This prize had been earned not through inherited legacy or a family donation, but through a fiercely articulated essay titled, Courage and Justice, the Cost and the Reward. She ascended the steps to the stage amid thunderous, genuine applause, no longer the uncertain, polite kind she had once received, but the powerful ovation of people who truly understood the depth of what she had survived and the magnitude of the systemic change she had catalyzed. She unfolded her prepared speech, her voice perfectly clear and even, filling the vast space. They told us repeatedly to keep our heads down. They told us that the pain would eventually pass if we simply stayed silent and compliant. But silence is not healing, she declared, her eyes sweeping over the rows of faces. Silence is what allows wounds to fester unchecked. Silence lets the same stories of cruelty and inequality repeat, generation after generation. We are infinitely more than what has been done to us. We are defined by what we choose to become. She paused, letting the statement settle. The immense, sprawling branches of the old oak tree were visible through the tall gym windows, arching majestically into the streaming sunlight. They tried to bury us because they mistook us for mere seeds, Era continued, her voice rising slightly. But seeds grow. Seeds push fiercely through the deepest darkness. Every scar, every tear we cried, every moment we felt completely alone. All of it only made our roots stronger and deeper. We survived. And now we rise. We rise not in spite of what happened here, but directly because of it. So I tell you all now, if you witness injustice, do not turn away. Do not let fear or apathy decide who you are or what you will do. She looked pointedly at Marcus, then at her tearful mother, and finally at Mr. Henderson standing ramrod straight in the front row. My courage came from the people who simply would not let me fall. From the ones who spoke up and, crucially, from the ones who listened. This diploma is for all of us, she concluded, holding up the scroll. And it is a solemn promise that I will never let anyone be buried in silence again. The applause that followed was not just thunderous. It was a reckoning. It was a vibrating wave of gratitude, acknowledgement, and catharsis that carried through the entire building, echoing outside to where the old oak stood like a proud sentinel. Teachers rushed to hug her, their own eyes wet with relief and pride. Friends, both new allies and old companions, swarmed her with genuine tears and joyous laughter. Marcus finally found her just off stage, his own cap slightly askew from the excitement. "You did it," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "We did it," she corrected him gently, gripping his hand tightly. "And they can never take this from us." In the immediate weeks following the symbolic fire beneath the Oak Hill had begun to irrevocably change its institutional character. The Diversity Council flourished, successfully bringing together students from previously isolated social circles who had never once shared a table. New, specialized counselors were hired to prioritize mental and emotional health. The teachers who had bravely stepped forward to testify and support Era were given new, permanent roles as mentors and advisory leaders. The school's public website now proudly displayed a new, clear motto: justice, courage, and truth. Saul Bledo, his reputation fully restored and his purpose renewed, began giving regular lectures on ethics and advocacy at the local community college. His faith in the power of the law slowly, steadily rebuilt, one eager student at a time. For those who had perpetrated the harm, the consequences were also enduring. Braden, now enrolled in the state's juvenile reform program, wore a bright orange vest instead of his old varsity jacket, spending his days picking up trash along county roads. Sometimes, passing drivers slowed their cars to stare, remembering the boy who had once imperiously ruled the school halls through fear. He worked in heavy silence. There were no cameras now, just the burning sweat and the crushing weight of his own unchangeable actions. Letters from Oak Hill's new principal arrived monthly, offering updates on the restorative justice initiatives, offers of ongoing counseling, and reminders that even seeds planted in bad soil might someday grow toward the light, given the right illumination. Era's home, meanwhile, was filled with acceptance letters and thick scholarship forms. Marcus, awarded a grant specifically for his bravery and service during the events, planned to join her in the city for college. Era's mother, her hands finally steady, her eyes softer and brighter than they had been in years, finally allowed herself the grace to dream openly, the paralyzing shadows of old fear growing faint and powerless. On the final night before they were scheduled to leave for college, Era visited the old oak tree one last time. Marcus was already waiting there, hands shoved deep into his pockets, silently watching fireflies spark and hover magically over the healing grass. The charred patch where the wooden frame had burned was already greening over, dotted vibrantly with resilient wildflowers. The scars on the earth remained visible, a memory, but life had demonstrably not stopped. "Ready?" Marcus asked quietly, stepping closer. Era nodded, her gaze fixed on the soaring branches. Ready, they stood together in comfortable silence, listening only to the gentle wind rustling the leaves high above them. Later, at the close of the long, emotional graduation ceremony, Era sought out Mr. Henderson in the departing crowd. The aging Marine, upon seeing her, immediately straightened to attention and rose, his salute remaining crisp and perfect, his eyes shining with pure pride. Era responded, straightening her own shoulders, and returned the salute, slow and utterly deliberate. No words passed between them. None were necessary. The crowd finally broke entirely, streaming out into the warm, late afternoon sunlight. Era walked away with Marcus and her mother, Saul Bledo trailing quietly behind them, the old lawyer whistling a soft, almost imperceptible tune. As they reached the high gates, Era turned for one last, comprehensive look at Oak Hill, at the place that had almost shattered her, but which had instead, miraculously, become the rich soil for something fierce and utterly unbreakable. They thought they could bury us, she thought, unaware that we were seeds. The world outside Oak Hill waited. Uncertain, often unfair, yet undeniably beautiful and wide open. Era stepped resolutely into that new dawn, her heart full of surviving scars, unstoppable hope, and a quiet, profound, and unstoppable promise. Never be silent in the face of cruelty. Every seed finds the sun. Era's journey was never solely about surviving cruelty. It was fundamentally about refusing to let silence achieve victory. Her story, a path from paralyzing fear to resonant courage, from isolating pain to thriving community, proved conclusively that true justice does not begin in formal courtrooms, but in the crucial moment someone decides, decisively, to speak up. Pain may indeed scar us, but it is also the force that can strengthen our roots and push us inexorably toward the light. So now, we ask you, if you witnessed injustice today, would you stay silent? Or would you stand up and speak? If this story moved you, please like the video, share it widely with others, and subscribe to the channel to help amplify the countless voices that refuse to be buried.